Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was the bodyguard of Azula. Naruto is banished from Konoha, but gives them the slip and boards a ship. Soon after, he is shipwrecked on Ember Island and is saved by Azula. 3 years later, Naruto is Azula's bodyguard while she hunts for the Avatar, but did he see the last of Konoha? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 68, Reunions in Love. Location, Konoha Hospital. The room was silent as the two people in the room quietly watched the person sleeping in the bed. The other teams had come by to see how Sasuke had been doing. But since the majority of the teams had been on the mission to get him, and the fact they could see the looks on Naruto's and Sakura's faces as they watched in silence, they had decided to leave. Lee might had to have been dragged out of the room, they weren't really paying attention. Sai had only watched from afar, he didn't join the others, and had left before anyone else had. How's he doing? Naruto finally asked Sakura from where he leaned against the wall next to the door. Ever since the teams had left, even before they had arrived, the silence between the two of them was awkward to say the least. Until now, neither of them knew what to say, or even speak period. He decided to be the one to break the silence by asking a simple question. He's doing fine. She replied, being all business. Heart rate is normal and so is his temperature. All in all, he looks like he'll be waking up soon. That's good to know, I guess. He said, muttering that last part to himself. It was probably something that she didn't need to hear at this moment. It probably would end with him either being sent through the window or the wall. Either way, pain would have definitely followed. The one thing that concerns me is the bandages around his eyes when he was brought in. She frowned slightly as she talked. I've checked the chakra that's centered in his eyes and the eyes themselves to see if anything was damaged. I found nothing, and yet I can't help but feel concerned. She looked over at the blonde. Did he tell anyone in the teams there what they were for? He shook his head. He was mostly asleep as we came back. And when he was awake, he didn't ask to have it taken off, so we just left it on. It might have been a little inconsiderate, but they had been more focused on getting back to Konoha. Just because the Tsuchikage had shown them where Itachi had taken his brother didn't mean he wouldn't try to have them ambushed. She heaved a somewhat irritable sigh. I guess I'll just have to ask him when he wakes up. He rolled his eyes. That is if he decides to tell you what happened. He said, mostly to himself. But she had managed to hear him. And what exactly is that supposed to mean? She asked, looking him straight in the eye. Her voice was both questioning and hard. It was a voice that demanded a swift and good answer. Unable to look her in the eyes, he turned his head to look out the nearby window. I'm just saying that he might not tell you. Everyone has their secrets, and some of those secrets they don't want to let anyone else know about. He explained. He knew that all too well. She accepted his reasoning with a small nod of acknowledgement before turning back to face the Uchiha in the bed. Silence came to the room again, but this time it was a little less awkward. Have I said thank you yet? She finally asked him. Said thank you for what? He asked back. For bringing him back, she clarified, gesturing lightly at the comatose Uchiha. When she saw him being carried into the village on the blonde's back, having already been cleared by the hospital soon after the retrieval team had left, she almost lost control and cried tears of relief. Instead, she told Naruto to take him straight to the hospital. From there, it had been all business, making sure Sasuke was okay. You didn't need to. It was a mission, nothing more and nothing less. He replied shortly. It was obvious to both of them that he didn't want to keep talking about it. Of course it was. She agreed. And yet, she had already heard about how it was he who found Sasuke first. How on the way back, he was the one to carry the Uchiha and always kept a close eye on him when they had stopped for the night. She kept it to herself, but when she saw those two come past the gates of the village, she had a small hope that it would be a step to the three of them mending their relationship. A small groan filled their ears, drawing their attention straight to the bed. Sasuke stirred slightly, rustling the sheets just as slightly. He cracked open an eyeball, wincing at the light, and saw a familiar pink-haired shinobi filling his vision. "I guess I'm home," he said with a whisper. Naruto didn't say anything, but Sakura did. "Yes, you're home, Sasuke," she told him, relief filling her voice as she spoke to him. "You should know better than to scare me like that nowadays." He weakly gave a roll of his eyes. "And I thought that you would have gotten used to stuff like this," he replied, his voice getting stronger. "We are shinobi after all. Just because we're shinobi, doesn't mean you get to make me worry like that." She reprimanded the Uchiha as he sat up. "We're teammates and friends, Sasuke. If something happened to you while I wasn't there, how do you think I would take it? I wouldn't be able to live with myself." She backed a little, fearing that she had said too much. But as he listened to her and looked at her, the words of Itachi came back to him. "I want you to find someone who loves you for you, and you love her in return." They whispered in his ear. Without warning, he reached out and pulled Sakura into a kiss. It was a safe bet that two of the three people in the room were not expecting that to happen. Both Naruto and Sakura had shocked expression on their face. However, Sakura's expression soon disappeared, and although it was replaced by small confusion, she began to return the kiss. Naruto, on the other hand, still had his shocked expression, and could only look away as they kept kissing. All of a sudden, he felt like an intruder, and yet, he somehow couldn't find it in him to walk away. As the kiss ended, Sakura drew back, the confusion showing fully on her face. "Sasuke, what?" she asked, unable to fully ask the question she had. He didn't say anything at first. He just pulled her into a hug. "I love you, Sakura Hirono," he said into her ear, using her full name and making her blush. "It took me some time to realize it, but I love you." It was a short and simple thing to say, but he didn't know any way else to put it. When she heard those words, Sakura couldn't believe it. Ever since she had first seen the Uchiha, she had a crush on him. And she had let that crush turn her into a fangirl for quite some time. All she wanted was to have Sasuke noticed her. She had even broken her friendship with Ino so she could get it, even though they had mended their bond and became friends again. And even though Tsunade had completely obliterated the fangirl she was, she still felt something for Sasuke. And now, he was telling her that he loved her. "When did this happen?" she asked quietly. She had to be sure he didn't just spontaneously say that. "I think it was when I first noticed that you weren't a fangirl anymore, but a shinobi," he admitted. When they had originally been put together, he had no doubts that she was a fangirl and therefore completely useless. And even though she had proven to both him and Naruto that she had strength, she was still pretty much a fangirl. But that had all changed when he rejoined the ranks. When he had met up with her and Kakashi, she greeted him as a friend and not squealing his name excitedly. She didn't hold back in the spar, and when she stood over him in victory, instead of telling him that she was sorry to hit him like that, she just smiled and told him better luck next time. As she walked away, he realized that she was an actual shinobi now, not a useless fangirl. The last thought his dazed mind had before Kakashi got him back on his feet was something along the lines of "what a woman." She blushed somewhat at those words. She remembered that day as well and what came afterwards. After he had rejoined the ranks, she had treated Sasuke as a friend and he had done the same to her. But as time went on, she began to feel different about Sasuke. It was a familiar feeling, which was why she never said anything. She feared that it was her old crush on him acting up again. But she soon realized that it wasn't a crush, but genuine love. Still, she didn't say anything in fear of being rejected again. And now, he told her that he loved her, and she could tell that he meant it. "I love you too, Sasuke," she whispered in his ear, returning the hug. "I guess it took me some time to admit it too." "I'm glad to hear that." he replied as he pulled away, giving her a gentle smile. She gave him the same smile and they hugged each other once again. Naruto, having watched all of this, now really felt like an intruder. It's time to leave, he thought to himself as he turned away from the two and began walking towards the door. Naruto, Sasuke called out, making the blonde stop. He stayed like that, with his back to the two of them. Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't look back. He chanted to himself inside his head. But as the silence dragged on, he couldn't help himself. He turned his head slightly to the side, enough so I could just look upon the new couple. Thank you, the Uchiha told him with a smile that Sakura shared. The two of them seemed to be more intimate now than before. He didn't know why he did what he did. Maybe it was because of the happiness that now was radiating off the two of them. Maybe it was because he had played an indirect hand in it. Or maybe it was because it made him feel something he didn't want to. But no matter what it was, it made him want to get away. For the second time in a few days, he bolted out of the room and of the hospital. Location: council room. Both Jiraiya and Kakashi stood in the middle of the room. The clan heads of the village, minus Sasuke and Tsunade, sat around them. The civilian council had not been called in as the situation they were discussing didn't deal with a civilian. It was not a formal meeting, as one could tell how they lounged in their chairs, or at least, sat casually. So Itachi is finally dead? Some asked. We found him in an adjacent room to Sasuke. He had no pulse, and he looked like he had died from a disease. Kakashi answered, as it was he who had found the body. He held a few pieces of paper in his hand, which I extracted from his death grip. I take it that the body was destroyed? Hayashi asked. It was a standard procedure to do so, but it was always a good idea to ask the question. Jiraiya nodded. Once we had gotten Sasuke out, we burned the body and collapsed the entire cave. Unless someone wants to dig through a lot of rubble, they're not going to get anything. And even if they did, it's highly unlikely that anything had survived. He declared. That is good to know. The Hyuga clan head acknowledged. Do you still have the papers with you? Inoichi asked them. If there was information on the thing that was vital, they needed to know what it was. The Toad Sage shook his head in the negative. Once Kakashi and I had read its contents, we burnt it to ash. We felt that the information on it was too sensitive to be on paper, that it was safer to have it as word of mouth. Well, what was on it then? Choza asked the two of them. It revealed why Itachi had killed the elders. After the Uchiha clan massacre, the Sandaime had given him a mission to kill them. Apparently, they had gone behind the Sandaime's back and gave him that order because the Uchiha clan were planning a coup d'état, and they thought the clan had to be destroyed. He explained. He also believed that Danzo influenced him into making that choice. And so, the Sandaime ordered him to kill them when he felt the time was right. After receiving that order, he decided to join the Akatsuki in order to pass the information he found to the village. Kakashi told them. As they listened to what he said, some of their eyes widened in surprise. They remembered how the situation was before the massacre. How tense relations between the Uchiha clan and the rest of the village had been. But they had no idea it might have gone to such lengths. Kami, some of them had believed things were looking up when the massacre happened. As he regained his composure, despite not letting it show on his face, Hayashi frowned. Could you please explain something to us, Kakashi? He asked. I remember Itachi being a person who would not have been easily convinced to murder his own clan. Who would have been so convincing to make him do something like that? Shursui Uchiha, Jiraiya said, getting everyone's attention. Or to be more precise, Shursui's Mangekyo Sharingan was able to be so convincing. Explain, Jiraiya. Tsunade ordered her teammate. There isn't much, he told them. But from what little Itachi wrote down for us, Shirsue's Mangekyo Sharingan had a unique ability called Koto Amatsukami. In essence, it would allow the user to cast a genjutsu on someone so subtle, they would believe that they were making their own choices. And how would this factor into Itachi believing he had been manipulated? Shibi asked. That was the question that was on everyone's minds at that moment. Because, according to what Itachi wrote, Danzo had stolen Shirsue's right eye and implanted it into his own socket, Kakashi answered. Itachi was unaware of that fact until Shirsui had told him. He had met with Danzo before that meeting. That is why he believed the Koto Amatsukami had been casted on him. The answer astounded everyone. All of a sudden, the reason why Danzo had kept the right side of his face bandaged made sense. He had been hiding a Sharingan in his eye socket. If it had been found out, he would have been charged with treason and executed within the week. What happened to Shirsue's left eye? Shikaku asked, realizing that Kakashi had only spoken of the right one. He gave it to Itachi before killing himself. Jiraiya answered the question. And before Itachi died, he destroyed it. Is the other eye still in Danzo? He asked Tsunade. She shook her head in the negative. We don't know how he did it, but Itachi escaped notice of the camera when he went back to Danzo's body a second time. He destroyed the right eye and for some reason, Danzo's right arm as well. Why would he do something like that? Itachi was never someone who did things without a reason, even if he never shared those reasons with anyone else. We don't know. Whatever the reason, we won't know now. Hayashi said. The Hyuga clan head was actually glad for that. Whatever Itachi's reason was, it had to deal with what Danzo had done. Quite frankly, he didn't want to know any more of that man's secrets. Kami take you, Itachi. The Toad Sage swore. You had to have died now of all times. What do you mean by that, Lord Jiraiya? Inoichi asked him. The two sages in the room shared a look. Tsunade gave him a nod of approval before breaking eye contact. He looked around the room before taking a deep breath. While we were on the hunt for Sasuke and Itachi, Naruto had confided in me one night. He told me that he believed that there was a voice in his head that was trying to make him loyal to Konoha. After reading what Itachi had written, I now believe that Danzo used the Koto Amatsukami on Naruto at some point. If they had been surprised by what they had learned before, now they were shocked. Even Kakashi was caught off guard, as he had not been told about that until now. Are you absolutely sure about this, Lord Jiraiya? Shibi asked him. Of course, I'm sure. He retorted. When he had learned the truth and connected the dots, he was furious. Danzo had been trying to brainwash his student, and was now trying to do it from beyond the grave. If he had been alive, he would be a dead man. And how did Naruto become aware of this? Choza inquired. From what he told me, it first appeared before we had left for Kumo, trying to subtly change what he thought and said. However, when we had returned, it started to actually speak to him. He explained. Why the change in tactics? Asked Hayashi. Sum snorted when she heard that. We're talking about Naruto Uzumaki here, probably the most stubborn person ever to have come out of this village. She declared. Don't you all remember that one time he kept waging a war against our dogs? They did. Although the rest of them weren't sure of the reason, when he was about 7, Naruto had waged a pranking war against the Inuzuka hounds. Even though several people told him that he was being stupid, that he should stop and leave the dogs alone, he didn't. Even when shinobi of the Inuzuka clan went after him for pranking their partners, he still kept his war going. It was only after both Tsum and the Sandaime Hokage talked to him that he finally stopped. Shibi understood the reasoning that she spoke of. If Naruto was indeed being stubborn as usual, the change in tactics would be understandable. He was refusing the subtle attempts, so it is going with the obvious ones. He noted. Whatever it is, it must be working. Jiraiya said. Before this mission, Naruto wouldn't have cared if Sasuke had been kidnapped. But during the entire mission, he had been up at the front of the run every day, and almost seemed to be unconsciously impatient every time we finally stopped. He frowned slightly. Unfortunately, Itachi didn't leave us a way to break this particular genjutsu. What about the usual methods? Choza suggested. They were always useful for getting a shinobi out of the influence of a genjutsu. He shook his head. I tried disrupting his chakra on the way back without his notice. He answered. He kept on acting the same, always the one to carry Sasuke and keeping an eye on him as we rested for the night. And I'm guessing pain didn't work either? If it did, then the genjutsu should have been broken when he and Killer Bee had been ambushed at Unreikyo. He replied, still having that feeling of failure and disappointment rake over him for not getting there in time. What if I were to take a look inside his mind? Inoichi asked. I could probably be able to find it and help him get rid of it. I don't know if that would work or not. The Toad Sage told him. This is a genjutsu of the highest level. And no offense to you, Inoichi, but there's probably a good chance that it'll be able to avoid your probes to find it. Plus, we don't know if the Kyuubi will even let you do that much at all. They all sat in silence for a moment before Shikaka spoke. What a drag this is going to be. He muttered to himself before clearing his voice and getting everyone's attention. Look, I know we all have the same question on our mind about this, but none of us don't really want to say it. So, I'm going to be the asshole in the room and ask it, should we even try to stop what this Koto Amatsukami is doing to Naruto? While everyone did look at him, Tsunade and Jiraiya were the only ones who gave him half-hearted glares. The reason they were half-hearted was because they knew he didn't approve of the idea. If Naruto does decide to come back, it should be by his own decision. Jiraiya said to him. I may be his sensei, but I will not force him to come back. That is his choice, no one else's. Which was Danzo tried to make for him. Tsunade finished what he said. And I'm open to ideas that would break the genjutsu. Anyone have one? They all began to throw out suggestions. At that point, it was more of a mass sounding board than any actual ideas. Seeing as you don't really require me anymore, may I take my leave, Lady Tsunade? Kakashi asked. She gave a wave of her hand, giving him his answer. He walked out of the room and into the corridor in silence. When he was a good distance away from the room and the voices inside it, he exhaled a small breath of relief. If anyone who didn't know him, and even most of the people who knew him, saw him at that moment, they would have thought nothing was wrong. But it wasn't. He had been carrying a secret ever since they found Itachi. In truth, there was another piece of paper in Itachi's hand. A smaller one addressed to him and encrypted in an ANBU code he knew. Once he had read it, he had immediately burned it. But the words still echoed inside his mind. Kakashi. I know you would be sent to find Sasuke. He is your student, it's only natural that the Hokage would send you, and I suspect, either his teammate or Naruto. The information I am going to pass to you is something I had risked my position in the Akatsuki and my life to obtain. As I am sure you are already aware, the masked shinobi amongst has claimed to be Madara Uchiha. I do not know if you believe him, but let me assure you he is not. As I am unsure if this will find you first or will found by someone else who knows this cipher, I cannot risk passing the information to you directly. Therefore, please understand what I am about to say. 2 Uchiha eyes traveled to the Kanabi Bridge, but only one saw it destroyed. One I slayed someone dearest and the other I saw it too. Now one I serves the leaf and the other wishes to see it disappear. I hope you know what this means. Please watch over my little brother for me. Itachi Uchiha. Of course, he had been stunned by what the letter had told him. He had figured out what Itachi had meant and yet, he almost wished that he hadn't it. For it had told him that what he had thought all these years had been wrong. He almost wanted to disbelieve it, but he couldn't. Itachi had written himself that he had risked everything to uncover the masked shinobi that he knew as Tobi. I guess I shouldn't call him that anymore. He thought almost bitterly to himself. He also knew that he should inform Tsunade of this. But he wasn't sure how to do it, especially with the concern she had at the moment. Hello there, Kakashi. Shizune greeted him as they passed each other in the hallway, Taunton in her arms. Hello, Shizune. He replied in turn. Are you going to help out Lady Tsunade? I'm going to see if she's working or if she's drinking, she said with a small laugh. If it's the latter, I'll be forced to sick Taunton on her. The pig in question agreed with an oink. Don't worry, she's working hard, he assured her. Tales of how Taunton kept Tsunade working instead of drinking were well known in the village, although never within earshot of the Hokage, so he could believe what she said. Actually, she's in a meeting with the clan heads and Jiraiya. They might need some sake soon. It would certainly help the idea throwing part. She narrowed her gaze at him. Is that truth, or is she trying to make a break for it again? It's the truth, I swear, he answered. If you say so, she replied, still suspicious. I guess I can bring in some sake. I just hope they don't go overboard with it. I'll see you around, Kakashi, she said to him as she walked past. He gave a small wave of his hand to say goodbye as he started walking again. While he didn't mind being around other people, he needed peace and quiet. He was still coping with the fact that the masked shinobi in the Akatsuki, who called himself Tobi, was in fact his old teammate who long thought dead, Obito Uchiha. Location: Naruto. After running from the hospital and all the way back to the house, he had stripped himself of his clothes and stepped into the shower. As the hot water poured onto him, he struggled to understand what was going on with everything that he considered important. I know the voice is trying to convince me to come back to the village, he thought to himself as he bent his head under the stream of water. But is it really someone just trying to tamper with me? What else would it be, Gaki? The QB asked him, trying to help him figure it all out. I don't know, he answered aloud. Maybe it's a part of me that wants to come back? Bullshit, completely and utter bullshit, the fox declared. I remember quite clearly that you had no qualms about running away. And let's not forget how you kept trying to make the Konoha teams leave you alone, while they were with the Avatar. This is in no way, shape or form, any part of you. Someone is tampering with you. If that's true, it's still not tampering with some things, he pointed out. I came back to stop the Akatsuki and save the other Jinchuriki in the hopes of making them a part of my family. Now I'm the last of them, and I don't seem to be getting anywhere with the whole stopping part. And there's this whole thing with Sasuke and Sakura. I couldn't have given a rat's ass about them. But when he was kidnapped and we found him, I was relieved. I called him Team QB. I haven't done that since I left. And there's what just happened in the hospital. Yeah, there's that, the blonde agreed. Thinking back on it, when he had seen the two of them together, it gave him the sense that he didn't belong there in that room. But it also showed him again that things weren't the same. First it was Sakura telling him to bring Sasuke back. Now, it was the fact that the two of them were telling each other that they loved the other instead of Sakura going after Sasuke and Sasuke ignoring her. Was what caused you to run the fact that they looked happy in each other's arms? Or was it the fact that Sasuke thanked you for it? The Biju inside of him asked. I'm not sure. Maybe it was both or just one of them. It feels like I should care about them, and yet, I don't, he admitted. He suddenly turned the water off and stood there as it stopped. I don't think I've ever felt so alone, he said to himself as he stepped out of the shower, reaching for a towel. What the hell am I, an amusing stuffed animal? The fox sounded a little annoyed, but the blonde wasn't really paying attention to his tone of voice. That's not what I meant. Aside from you, I don't think I have anyone I can really talk to, he explained. And what do you call Team Paragon or Team Avatar? You told them about me. Not to mention Azula. You're her boyfriend, right? I know that, furball. But there's a difference between telling them you have a biju sealed inside of you, and trying to tell them that I'm having second thoughts about the village, and it may or may not be of my own violation. He defended himself as he began to towel off. So who do you think you would be able to talk to then if you can't talk to them? I'm assuming that the super pervert is out too? Yeah, he is. The blonde paused for a moment as a thought crossed his mind. Maybe I could have talked to my parents about this? He mused aloud. The QB raised an eye when he heard this. He had never heard his Jinchuriki say anything like that before. He never really spoke about his parents at all. Why are you having this sudden wondering of your parents? You've hardly bothered to even think about them. Trust me, I've checked. Number 1, talk about an invasion of privacy. Naruto commented. Gaki, I've been sealed inside of you since you were just born. Privacy went out the window a long time ago. Number 2, wouldn't this be something to talk about with a parent? He asked, ignoring the fox's sarcastic comment. You would be asking the wrong creature. It was true. The only person the fox could technically call a parent had been dead for a long time, and who he had to share with 8 other siblings. I should have figured. The blonde muttered to himself as he finished toweling off. I wonder what it would be like to have parents. Hell, to have any kind of family. The Biju frowned when he heard that innocent-sounding comment. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you have a family. You know, Saka, Suki, Zuko, Jun, Katara, Azula, those people? I'm talking about a real family here, Fox. You know, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles? I don't have that. I just have friends. He finished quietly. Why do you think I feel alone? There are just some things that friends can't help you with. Ah, I see. The fox said. Thankfully, I know a way to correct this little problem of yours and this faulty thinking, which I believe is the voice acting up again. What do you mean? He asked, walking over to the mirror. It had steamed over while he had been in the shower. The QB stayed silent as his Jinchuriki reached out to wipe away the steam on the mirror, only to whip it back with a strangled shout and a curse. In the mirror was not only his face, but those of his parents. That's what I mean. The Biju answered. Now, if you would kindly turn around. Naruto did as he was told, not really thinking, just reacting. What he saw surprised him again was the fact that both of his parents were actually standing in front of him. He blinked to make sure he wasn't seeing things. But when he opened the eyes again, they were still there. The only difference was that they were now in a white void, and he was wearing actual clothes. That didn't concern him as much as the 2 supposed to be dead people in front of him. Hello, Naruto. Minato greeted him with a smile. Are you really here? He asked, almost hesitantly. There was a somewhat look of wonder on his face as he examined the 2 of them. Of course we are. It looked you needed some help, so the fox whatever Kushina was going to finish with. It was interrupted when the look of wonder on her son's face disappeared and was replaced with a look of anger and rage. Without warning or prompting, he stepped right up to his father and drove his fist into his face, hard. What the fuck is wrong with you? Bellowed the younger blonde as the older one fell to the ground. Why would you ever seal the QB into your son, your own flesh and blood, and then just die? He whipped his head to look at his mother. The same goes for you. Do either of you have any idea of the hell I went through because of what you did? The beatings, the dirty looks no thought I saw, the way people looked at me with disgust, how I was kept being told how worthless I was by everyone. Do you have any idea? The words that spewed forth from his mouth echoed around them. Even as Minato stood back up, neither he nor Kushina said anything. They waited as Naruto's ragged breathing from the shouting slowly calmed down and went back to normal. Finally, it was Kushina who spoke, breaking the silence. I guess there is a heart in there somewhere. She remarked with a grin. And here I was worried that my son wouldn't have one. Why are you two here? He demanded. Where in the name of Kami is here anyway? He looked around and saw only white nothingness. As I was trying to say before you so rudely interrupted me, the Kyuubi summoned us to talk to you and help you. She answered. As for where we are inside a part of your mind. His father told him, finishing the explanation. She looked around for a couple of seconds. It's a little bleak and depressing. She casually remarked as she turned her gaze back to her son with a smirk on her face and a shadow of laughter in her eyes. You might want to consider calling a fashion designer to spruce up the place. How the hell did the furball summon you two? He asked, ignoring her comment. You're supposed to be dead. I found their chakras in the seal after you lost control during the war. The voice of the Kyuubi answered the question, echoing all around them. Believe me, it was as much as a surprise for me as it is for you. He had been examining the seal itself and was thunderstruck when he had found their chakras in it. And now, we're here to help. Minato repeated what had been said before. Help with what? His son asked shortly. You're the one who wanted to talk to us about what's happening to you. The Yondaime Hokage pointed out mildly. When he heard those words, the annoyed look on Naruto's face disappeared and was replaced with one of unease. I thought it would have been wishful thinking, not actually happening. He said, trying to defend himself. You're welcome. The voice of the fox spoke again, causing the younger blonde to look up, or at least what qualified as up in the void. He wasn't even sure if they were floating or standing and skull. Well, we're still here. Kushina commented. So, we might as well get talking, you know. When both husband and son looked at her, her cheeks lit up in embarrassment. Oh damn it. I was hoping that wouldn't come out. Come on, Kushina. You know I find it cute. Minato said with a smile. He did enjoy hearing his wife utter her verbal tick. She just turned on him and gave him a scowl. Our son doesn't need to hear things like that from his parents, you big dork. She admonished him. The smile he had on his face turned into a goofy grin as she admonished him. Wow. That sounds incredibly familiar. I think you used to say something similar, Kit. The Biju commented, enjoying himself a little too much if the voice was anything to go by. What was it you used to say? Believe. I swear to Kami Furball, if you keep talking, I will hunt you down wherever you are hiding and skin you. The now flustered fire paragon screamed out into the void. It was bad enough that the fox kept coming into the conversation, but he kept doing it when he wasn't needed. Both of his parents just looked at him in silence as he shouted into the void. When he was done, Minato looked over at Kushina. He is definitely your son. He declared. All that got him was a punch to the shoulder. Naruto, she said, looking away from her husband and getting the attention of her son. Do you remember when you and your friends were facing off Orochimaru and he had me summoned? How would you know about that if you were inside me? He demanded almost instantly. I may just be the chakra of Kushina Uzumaki, but it was enough to see through her eyes when her soul was summoned. She explained patiently. I saw what happened and I remembered it afterwards. Let me guess, you're embarrassed and ashamed of me. The voice the blonde spoke with was both sarcastic and accusatory. Nothing of the sort, she replied. You made your choice and there's nothing we can do about it. Not to mention you kept your head in a situation that looked to be designed for you to lose it. Besides, we would still love you anyway. Minato chimed in. Kushina nodded her agreement of what her husband said. He just stared at the two of them in disbelief for a couple of seconds. And here I thought you would want me to stay in the village. He finally said. You've made your choice, Naruto. His father said, repeating the same words his wife had just said. If you have decided to stay away from Konoha, it is your choice. Then why do I feel this way about the place? The blonde asked, suddenly sounding angry. Why do I have something in my head trying to convince me to come back? To rejoin the shinobi ranks? He sounded like he really wanted the answer to the question. Why do I feel like I care about those two when I know that I don't? That's something you will have to figure out on your own. His mother told him. But even though you don't want to be a Konoha shinobi, doesn't mean you have to cut ties with the village. But I want to cut ties with the village. I want to be far away from the place and to be left alone. Is that too much to ask? If you wanted to be alone, then why are you in the village, helping it now? She asked back. It sounded like an innocent question, but there was also a tone of curiosity to it. If the looks on her and Minato's faces were anything to go by, they actually were curious. I'm here because I made a promise to help get rid of the Akatsuki. He told the two of them. That's it. He is definitely your son. This time, Kushina said that to Minato, who could only shrug his shoulders in reply. But let me tell you something, young man. You are not alone at all. She told Naruto, sounding she was lecturing him. Of course, I'm alone. He protested. Look at me. I have no family to speak of. The one person I thought of a grandfather is dead. There is no I can really talk to. Whatever he was going to say next was cut off by the cry of pain he uttered when the redhead among them thumped him hard on the head. You're not alone, you know. She told him again, looking a little angry. You have friends all around you. They are your family, you know. Even though there are times when you wish they weren't around, they are still your friends and family. She poked his chest each time she finished a sentence. If you shut them out, you would truly be alone. Family isn't just flesh and blood, you know. As he backed away from his mother, and her poking finger, Naruto realized she was right. His friends were his family. He had pretty much treated them as such, so why would he try to think any differently of them? There was the slightest feeling of annoyance and disappointment in the back of his head when he realized this. Aha! I have you now. The Kyuubi declared before his presence disappeared completely. If either of his parents had heard the fox, they didn't say anything about it. You're right. They are my family. He admitted quietly. I'm sorry, I didn't know why I was thinking like that. You needn't apologize to us. His father told him with a warm smile. You're troubled, Naruto. But your friends can help you. How can they help me with something that might be trying to brainwash me into rejoining the village? He asked back. You don't know until you try asking them. Besides, you have a girlfriend. The warm smile became more of a grin. I'm sure you could tell her anything. And there's the former student of FS Sensei. The younger blonde declared in a deadpan tone. When he saw that both of them were confused, he elaborated. I'm talking about Jiraiya. What does the FS stand for? Fucking sadist, he answered promptly. His response made both Minato and Kushina look at each other with grins on their faces before howling in laughter. Had they not supported each other, they would have fallen to the ground. Oh, Kami, that is just too true. The Yondaime Hokage stated as he tried to get back up on his feet. I wish I had thought of that when I was younger. It's a good one. Kushina agreed as she stood back up alongside him. But as the laughter died away, she looked at her son. But we know you love Azula, Naruto. And we know she loves you in return. You can tell her about what's happening. Can I really tell her something like that? Wait, how do you know she loves me when you've never met her yourselves? He asked them. We may or may not have given her a visit via a dream. Minato remarked causally. What? How could you even? He trailed off when he noticed that they were beginning to fade away. What's happening? Oh, it looks like our chakra is running out. His father commented as he looked at his own fading hand. What does that mean? Naruto asked, sounding more and more worried. It means we'll be gone soon. he answered, a sad expression forming on his face as well as Kushina's. We put our chakra into the seal so we could talk to you once. And now since our chakra is running out, our time is up. So, this is, goodbye? The younger blonde was sad to see them leave after just meeting them for the first time. He had so much to talk about with them now that he realized that he wanted to talk to them. In a sense, yes, Kushina answered. But in another sense, it's not. Do you remember what you told your friend Shikamura while the both of you were in the cemetery? He did with amazing clarity. Those who you've lost will live on in you, he said, almost to himself. Both of his parents nodded their agreement. And so, we will. Minato told him with a warm smile. As his parents faded more and more away, the younger blonde grabbed both of them and pulled them into a hug at the same time. Mom, Dad, he said, calling them that for the first time. Thank you. Tears formed in his eyes and threatened to fall, but he wouldn't let them. While both of them had been surprised by the hug, they smiled and hugged him back. We love you, Naruto, Kushina told him as they disappeared. We will always love you. They faded from his grip and he found himself back in the bathroom. He wiped the tears from his eyes. While he still wasn't sure he could tell the others about the voice, he was still glad his parents had corrected his thinking. Honestly, how did he start thinking like that? Thanks for that, QB, he told the fox. When he didn't get a response, he didn't think anything of it and went for the door. When he opened it, Azula was on the other side, hand outstretched like she had been going for the handle. She saw the state of dress he was in, a towel with still somewhat wet hair. She blushed and looked away. Sorry, I didn't know that you were in, she began to say, only to get interrupted when he pulled her into a tight hug. I love you, he told her as he held her. I probably don't tell you that enough times, but I still love you. I don't want to ever lose you. I want to stay with you for the rest of my life. While being initially surprised by the hug, when she heard those words, her heart melted and she returned the hug. I love you too, she said into his ear. I love you so much. He smiled when he heard those words. Thank you, he told her before pulling his head back to kiss her. She didn't deny or refuse him that kiss, she returned it. While it may have started out as a chaste one, the kisses got hotter as they continued. Hands soon began wander around, feeling the other's body. As she traced a hand over his stomach, Naruto shuddered with pleasure in her arms. But with that one single motion, the towel fell off of his waist. She now realized that she had a completely naked blonde in her arms. Sorry. She immediately apologized, desperately trying not to look down. But instead of looking embarrassed, the blonde just looked at her and smiled. He went for a spot on her neck and kissed it. The sensations that went through her made her gasp and arch her back. When she did, his quick hands had opened up her vest and shirt, which fell to the ground. The only thing she now wore on her torso was the necklace of the Shodan Hokage. There's nothing to be sorry about, he told her once he was done kissing her neck. If you're going to see all of me, I would like to see all of you. When she saw the gleam in his eye, she had a feeling about what was going to happen, as she had tried to do it the night of her birthday. Suddenly, she felt nervous. Are you sure you want to? She asked. You didn't want to last time. Last time, I was doubtful of our relationship and I didn't want to admit that I love you. I don't have that problem anymore. I'm not sure of what to do, she admitted. Thinking about it, she didn't really how she was going to proceed that night or any other night she tried to seduce him. Don't worry. He hoisted up her into his arms and grabbed her rear. On instinct, she wrapped her legs around him to hold, and judging by the smile on his face, that was the right move. I'll be gentle, at first. With that said, he carried her into the bedroom, kissing her the entire way. Chapter 69, Loss and Resolution. Location, Team Paragon. Well, that was a bit of a bust. Naruto stated as he and the rest of his team made their way through the forest. It had been 3 weeks since Sasuke had been brought back to Konoha. Once they had knew that Sasuke was going to be fine, even though he would be staying in the hospital for an extended time, they had gone back onto missions like usual. Like before, they were looking for information, but this time they were looking for the location of the Akatsuki, having concluded that Amigakure was just way too obvious. That would depend on your definition of a bust, Gaki. Jiraiya said in response. They had gone to one of the neighboring countries surrounding the Land of Fire looking for information. They found information, but it wasn't what some of the teams were looking for. All we got was a name and a possible country. I'd call that a bit of a bust. The blonde replied. We got something, didn't we? Sokka asked. The tribesman looked vaguely annoyed at his teammate's attitude. I said a bit. He retorted, offended that it sounded like he had thought it was all for nothing. And that's a point to him. Azula remarked, earning herself a grin from her boyfriend and making her blush slightly in return, having seen that grin the last time they were in the bedroom, just before he had pinned her to the wall and took her there. Ever since that night, they had frequently danced the bedroom tango, although not as frequently as Sokka and Suki. At first, they tried to keep it a secret, but were found out by Jiraiya. Surprisingly enough, he didn't ask for any details. Still, something is better than nothing. June said from atop of Nyla, leading the way. But where is this mountain's graveyard? Suki asked. A possible country isn't much to go on. We could be going on a dead-end chase. Kinda makes you wish for the old days. Sokka mused aloud. Naruto looked over at him with a confused look on his face. What are you talking about, the old days? He asked. We're teenagers, Sokka. We are too young to have old days. I was talking about during the war. The water paragon replied easily. You know, the one where we went around our side of the planet with you, Azula, and Zuko coming after us? And that's a point to him. June commented. Nyla seemed to hiss in agreement. Things were much simpler then. Sokka continued. Go here, learn this, talk to this person, and above all, defeat the Fire Lord. It was much simpler, see? They could see his point. They always do in hindsight. Jiraiya told him. Odds are in a few years, maybe even a decade, what we do now, we'll consider the old days. Except for you, said Azula. You already have old days, so you already have a lead on us. While the Toad Sage scowled, everyone else laughed. In any case, how long before we get back to the village? Suki asked. We're close. The Toad Sage answered her, glad to be moving on from the dig at him. I'd say we're about 1-2 hours away. He cast a look over at Naruto. He wasn't sure if the Kotoama Tsukumi working or not, but the Toad Sage had seen the blonde grow more and more cordial with the Konoha 11 and the village in general. It was going quicker than before, but not completely. And there were times when Naruto would look a little confused after a talk, like he had no idea what he had just said. While that did give Jiraiya hope, it was inconsistent. But with any luck, the little surprise that was waiting for them back at the village would help somehow. Good, I could use some sleep, Naruto said, mostly to himself. Despite what the Kyuubi and his parents had urged him to do, he was still unsure of telling his team, and most definitely Azula, about what was in his head. It also didn't help the fact that he could still hear the voice speaking, trying to urge him to do something or say something that would make him even more loyal to the village. But even though he kept refusing, sometimes it would get through, and he would do whatever it wanted him to do. And even though the fox had knew about the voice, in the 3 weeks after that day, he still had no luck catching the voice. Are you sure you're thinking of something else? June asked him with a suggestive smirk on her lips. For the love of Kami, June, he said with a light blush on his cheeks, which Azula had the same. I actually want to sleep. Who do you take me for, Sokka? The blush vanished from their faces and appeared on Sokka's and Suki's faces. You have a point there. Besides, with that supposed surprise FS-sensei has been telling us about, they're the only ones who could. She acknowledged before laughing aloud. Everyone else, with the exception of Sokka and Suki, joined in the laughter. The Water and Earth Paragon tried to not join the laughter, but the fact that what Naruto said was true and the laughter was infectious made them join in soon. But in that brief moment of laughter, they had unconsciously dropped their guard. And it was taken advantage of. Shinra Tensei. A voice familiar to the blonde spoke from the forest. Everyone, with the exception of Naruto and Jiraiya, was suddenly thrown into the forest opposite of where the voice came from. Both the blonde and the toad sage heard their shouts fill the air before being silenced by hitting trees. And all the while, Naruto felt a cold chill go down his back. Oh, Kami saved me. It's them. He realized with a deep sense of dread. It seems I misjudged the range. The voice of pain spoke. I had intended to make all but the Jinchuriki unconscious. All 6 of the pains stepped out from behind the surrounding trees, making their presence known to both Naruto and Jiraiya. But it will still be easier now, and much less time-consuming. When he saw the spiky-haired pain, Jiraiya's eyes went wide in shock and surprise. Is that you, Yahiko? He demanded. The pain in question tilted his head, like he was a dog listening to an odd sound. You see Yahiko in this pain? Interesting, but you were his sensei after all. What's going on here? The toad sage almost shouted. Conan said you were dead. You know this guy, FS-sensei? Naruto demanded, gesturing with his head at the spiky-haired pain. He was one of my former students, a kid named Yahiko. I met him, Conan, and another kid during the Second Shinobi World War. He stopped and looked more closely at the pain he knew. What happened to Nagato, Yahiko? Why do you and these other 5 people have the Rinnegan? This body is not Yahiko, Jiraiya-sensei, we are now Pain. The spiky-haired Pain gestured to the other Pains surrounding the two. As for Nagato, Conan was correct. He is dead. There was no hint of emotion in his voice. He sounded like he was just stating facts. If the blonde and the toad sage were being honest with themselves, it was a little unnerving. Where is Conan? Naruto asked as he looked around. He was trying to stall for time, hoping that his teammates would get back up and help even the odds. She is not here. The bald Pain said, swinging the attention over to him. We do not need for her to watch over everything that we do. This is something that does not require her. And without saying anything more, the bald Pain charged straight at them. He was going for Jiraiya, who saw him coming and stood ready. When he got close, the toad sage attacked first with a kick, forcing the Pain onto the defensive. The spiky-haired Pain lifted his hand and pointed in the two combatants' direction. Naruto realized what he was trying to do and immediately threw 2 kunai at him. He saw the incoming projectiles and swung his hand in their direction. Shinra Tensei. He spoke, sending them flying away. Keep an eye on that one. Naruto shouted at Jiraiya as he leapt for the chubby Pain. He's like a magnet, able to draw or repel things with a jutsu. Is it continuous? He asked back as he ducked under a punch and tried to sweep the bald Pain's legs out from under him. It didn't work, but the bald Pain was forced to back off a little, allowing him to continue pressing the attack. No, but the delay between uses is only 5 seconds. Now cover your eyes. The blonde ordered as he pulled out a few smoke bombs and threw them to the ground, covering the area in smoke. As the Pains just stood there, waiting for the smoke to clear, Naruto and Jiraiya regrouped. What was that all about? The toad sage demanded as they hid in a nearby tree. A quick look past the trunk of the tree told them that their teammates were still unconscious. They can all see what one sees. Naruto hurriedly explained. You can't fight one when all of them can see you, otherwise they can see what you're doing from every possible angle and act accordingly. You have to fight them one-on-one. That's going to be difficult, he admitted. Even he would have trouble against that kind of ability to see the battlefield. But he could see a way around it. You could counter it with your Kage Bunshin. I was thinking the same thing. Overwhelm them and then isolate them. The blonde agreed with a nod of his head. If they isolated each of the pains, their ability to see what the others saw would be greatly hampered, if not completely voided. Okay, when the smoke clears, you take the lead, Jiraiya ordered. Isolate the pains. I'll take care of the bald one. Alright, but be careful. Whatever that bald pain, it isn't a normal person. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the sound of a tree snapping filled the air and their ears. Shinra Tensei. Pain spoke. The tree began to fall, crashing into the ground. The entire forest shook from the impact of the fallen tree, and yet, the other members of Team Paragon would not stir. You okay, Gaki? The Toad Sage demanded. When the tree had begun to fall, he had leapt clear of it and landed safely. But he hadn't kept track of Naruto. I'm pinned, the blonde answered. He hadn't been so lucky or quick in getting off of the tree. The end result was he had his arm caught by a tangle of branches, and it was hard to get it out. You know, Jiraiya-sensei, you really should try to learn to keep your voice down when you discuss strategy. Pain's voice idly commented as the ponytailed one came into view. It rendered the smoke cover moot. That one can use summons, Naruto informed Jiraiya as he tried to get his hand free. What kind of summons? He asked back, staying between the blonde and the member of the Akatsuki. I don't know. He summoned something when he went after B, that's all I can really tell you. How helpful, he muttered to himself as he refocused his attention back on the pain in front of him. When it looked like he was about to clasp his hands together, the Toad Sage leapt into combat, flipping through the hand seals. Ranjishigami no Jutsu, he cried, his hair lengthening and taking the shape of a lion's mouth. The ponytailed Pain just watched in silence as the hair of the Toad Sage came flying at him. When it got into striking distance, he simply jumped out of the way. But the jutsu wouldn't let him go that easily, and neither would its user. It curved back into the air and went after him. Wherever he would land, the hair of Jiraiya would be right behind him. It ended when the Pain stumbled slightly. It was enough for the jutsu to catch him. As Jiraiya concentrated, 2 strands of hair rose up and began to wrap around the Pain's neck. Look out on your left, Naruto suddenly warned him. He cast an eye over to his left and saw the long-haired Pain coming straight at him with a hand raised. Not sure if it was the same as the ability as the spiky-haired Pain, he would figure out if that was Yahiko or not later. Much later, he stayed out of reach and also directed some of his hair at him too. No, don't do that, his student told him as the hair flew at the intended target. What? Why? Jiraiya demanded. He got his answer when the pudgy Pain leapt in front of the long-haired Pain and held his hands. That's why. That Pain can absorb jutsus. True to Naruto's words, there was a brief flash of light as a barrier appeared between the chubby Pain and the Toad Sage's hair. When the hair struck the barrier, it recoiled like it had been stung by something. It fell lifelessly to the ground and returned to its normal length. The hair holding the pony-tailed Pain also fell to the ground and returned to the normal length, allowing the person it had been holding to get free. Without saying a word, the 3 began to attack Jiraiya. Come on, arm, Naruto snarled as he tried to get it free. Get out already. He craned his neck to look over at the rest of Team Paragon. Hope rose in his chest as he saw that they were beginning to stir. They're coming around, he thought with relief. We just need to hold on. Meanwhile, the Toad Sage was barely able to hold his own against 3 of the Pains. He was using just about every trick and method of fighting he knew to stay alive. His three opponents were working in perfect unison against him. He was forced to keep the ponytailed pain from trying to summon anything while also keeping the long-haired pain out of touching distance, all the while fighting the bald pain. If his opponents were having any difficulty, they did not show it. Instead, they kept blank expressions on their faces. As they fought, the other three pains appeared. But they didn't join the fight. Instead, they just hung back and observed. "Try to break free from your fight, FS-sensei," Naruto shouted when he saw the other three. "Go for the bulky-looking one." "Why would I do that?" Jiraiya asked as he danced away from the long-haired pain, while also simultaneously throwing a kunai at the ponytailed pain, forcing him to catch it and keeping his hands apart, and planting a foot in the bald pain's torso, sending him stumbling to the ground. His cloak got caught on a nearby rock and was torn off, revealing his additional arms and blade tail. He can revive the other pains. If he's taken out, they stay down for good, he explained hurriedly. Hearing a groan, he looked over and Sokka sitting up. "Sokka, help me get free," the blonde shouted at the tribesman. "What?" Sokka asked in return, a little dazed. As his vision cleared and he saw how his teammate was trapped, he immediately drew his Zanpakuto and rushed over. When he was by Naruto's side, he began to hack at the trapping branches. Sasuke and Azula had also come to at that point, along with Akela and Nyla. The wolf automatically to Sokka's side and tried to help free Naruto. Suki went after the pudgy pain, her fans out and ready to use. She attempted to use them to distract the pudgy pain's sight, with only marginal success. Azula attacked the long-haired pain with a flying spin kick, bending fire at him and sending him back. The only one who didn't really move was Nyla, who was attempting to wake June up. "Hurry up," Naruto urged Sokka. "I'm working on it," he replied, hacking away at the branches. Akela was gnawing at a different branch in the tangle, trying to get the blonde free in another way. Naruto cut his arm getting free, but it was a slow process. Jiraiya, now free of two opponents, was able to attack the bald pain more freely. Drawing a kunai that seemed to glisten somehow, he approached the bald pain and struck quickly. The bald pain tried to move out of the way, but the kunai was still able to shallowly pierce his side. When he saw the blood fly, the toad sage grinned and kicked the bald pain away. "Now for the next one," he declared silently, moving directly for the bulky pain. What happened next would be etched into Team Paragon's memories for the rest of their lives. Just as June was finally coming to, Jiraiya was charging at the bulky pain, the kunai at the ready. But just as he reached the intended pain, the spiky-haired pain, who everyone had forgotten about, stepped in between the two, raised his hand, and said Shinra Tensei. Silence seemed to engulf them all as Jiraiya backwards into the air, only to end with a sickening sound, like bloody meat being skewered, as he was impaled on the blade tail of the bald pain. "No!" Naruto screamed as the toad sage slipped off the blade tail and fell face first into the ground. The blonde began to struggle even more fiercely to get free. The spiky-haired pain saw his reaction and how he tried to get free. "We're done here," he declared. The other pains all grouped around him. Those who had combatants were able to disengage easily as their opponents were staring at the body of Jiraiya in stunned shock. They leapt away, leaving the team alone in the forest. "There!" Sokka cried as he finally cut through the branch. Naruto pulled his arm out and raced over to Jiraiya, rolling his body over. The toad sage was still as he faced the sky. "Ow!" he breathed out, blood seeping out of the wound. "I guess one was the only one I could get." "Just stay still, FS-sensei," the blonde told him. He tried to pull some medical supplies out, only to have a hand grab his, stopping him. "Don't bother, Gaki," he said, gently admonishing. "This is it for me." No, it's not. You are going to live, do you hear me? You're not going to die." He refused to believe that Jiraiya was going to die. Yes, I am. I only wish I could have gotten more one of the pains. What are you talking about? Sokka asked him. He held the kunai up for a brief moment, letting everyone see the glistening on it. One of Orochimaru's poisons, he explained. It targets the chakra, making the user lose control, weakens, and eventually dies of chakra poisoning. There's no antidote or cure for it. How long have you had that? Suki asked. A while, he admitted with a wheeze. His breathing began to slow down and the blood seemed to seep out faster. Come on, you perverted bastard. Just hold on until we get back to the village. Naruto begged him, his tone taking on a pleading tone. Tsunade will fix you right back up and you'll be fine. He gave a weak smile in return. We both know I wouldn't make it to the gate alive. Still, at least, I didn't die a meaningless death. I lived long and well. He turned his head to the side and spat the blood that was filling his mouth. The blood didn't fly far as he had probably had intended. It only went a few inches from his mouth. Hey, Naruto, he said, his voice getting weaker. Yes? The blonde replied. Whatever you decide to do about Konoha, I won't judge you. It's your choice. The Toad Sage promised. He smiled sadly at those words. How would you be able to do that if you're going to be dead like you think you are? Do you know some way to come back from the grave? Everyone smiled at that small jab. Even though it wasn't a good one, they knew it was probably going to be the last one between the two. Jiraiya could grin very weakly at that. Fair point, he conceded. Well, at least, promise me something. His voice was getting quieter and weaker with every word he spoke. What? Promise me that you'll keep writing. I think it's time I put my pen down. That last word seemed to disappear halfway past his lips as his breathing stilled, and the life finally went out from his eyes. Thus, Jiraiya, the Toad Sage of Konoha, did die. As Naruto stared at the body of his sensei, it finally seemed like the fact had reached him. As he realized it, that small voice in his mind tried to make its move, taking the opportunity to try and make the blonde more loyal to Konoha with the death of Jiraiya. But that was a fatal mistake, as the Kyuubi, who had been chasing that voice ever since he learned about it, had been waiting in wait. Hello there. The fox said with a savage grin as he grabbed hold of the voice and everything it represented. I believe you have been doing something that neither my Jinchuriki nor I agree with. It's going to stop now. For days later, Jiraiya's funeral was held, and every single person in Konoha attended. Shops and hotels were closed and drinking establishments would be the same until nightfall, where they would open with incredibly low prices for drinks, so that people could raise a cup to the memory of Jiraiya. It was a time-honored tradition of Konoha. The academy and other schools in the village had the day cancelled. The fire daimyo had even declared that the day was to be one of mourning. The land of fire, and Konoha most of all, had lost one of their heroes. As everyone in the village filled the streets, bowing their heads in remembrance as the funeral bells rang, those who were of high rank in the village, and those who knew the man personally stood before his grave in the cemetery. Tsunade stood in front of the headstone, facing everyone else. We are. She began to speak, her voice choked and filled with emotions she tried to shove back down. It was hard to speak like a leader speaking of a subordinate when said subordinate had been her teammate and friend. We are here to remember and honor the life of Jiraiya, the Toad Sage. She started again, trying to keep her voice level. He had served the village faithfully throughout his years, even when I had lost faith and Orochimaru had betrayed it. He was the kind of shinobi other shinobi worth their kunai should have strived to be. And although some of his habits may have been considered weird, odd, or downright perverted, he was a good man. A small smile came upon her face as she looked back at the grave. And he was a good friend too. As she spoke, Naruto glanced over at the people standing by him and his team. As it turned out, the little surprise Jiraiya had told Team Paragon was supposed to be a visit from Team Avatar. He had been planning it for a week before his death, and they had only arrived that day. They had waited at the gate along with Tsunade, who was there to keep an eye on them, to surprise Team Paragon, only to see them coming up to the gate with a body on their shoulders, walking like they were in a funeral march. And now, they stood quietly beside him, wearing white clothes, which Team Paragon, with the exception of Naruto, also wore, as opposed to the black that everyone else was wearing. Would anyone like to share something about him one last time? Tsunade asked, getting Naruto's attention again. Everyone there could tell she wanted to say something, but as the Hokage, she had to let someone else start. I would. Kakashi said aloud as he stepped forward. It was a bad time after the Kyuubi attacked. Minato-sensei had been killed along with his wife. I tried to bury myself in work to try and ignore the thought that I had failed them and the pain that came with it. But it didn't work, and I was slowly falling into a depression. That was when Lord Jiraiya found me. He told me he knew a surefire way to cheer me up and get me out my depression. I told him that nothing could do that. He just grinned, handed me a copy of the first Ika Ika book, and said, "Get back to me when you're done with that and see if you think it still won't help." So I read the book, and in the end, he had been right. It's thanks to Lord Jiraiya that I was able to serve the village to my full capacity again, and that I became a fan of Ika Ika. No one said a word about what he said as he stepped back. In all honesty, no one had really heard that story before. Suddenly, Kakashi's habit of reading the series in public made a lot more sense to a lot of them. Zuko was the one who stepped forward next. He had grown his hair out a little since Naruto and his team had seen him last, and was a little brawnier too, although his clothes hid the fact. I remember this one day in Ba Sing Se. He began. Jiraiya had been going around the city, and I went after him to make sure he didn't cause any incidents. I eventually found him sitting at a table in a marketplace, writing in a small book. It had been so odd to see him like that, not chasing after every single beautiful woman that crossed his path, so I stayed silent and watched. It was later I learned that he had been writing down observations about the people he saw, and was creating characters from what he saw. It was one of those things that would make a person realize that Jiraiya was a far more complex man than you would originally think. There was this one time when my father brought me into the council room when I was a mere genin. Hayashi said, stepping forward as Zuko stepped back. Both the clan heads and the civilian council had been arguing about who would succeed the Sandaime as Hokage, with both Tsunade and Orochimaru as the favorites. After a few minutes watching silently, I joined the argument. It had soon left the council room and went to a drinking establishment where the Sannin were. Both Tsunade and Orochimaru soon joined the argument, each for their own side. When someone had suggested Jiraiya for a candidate, the man himself spat out the sake he had been drinking and asked that someone if he was, and I quote, out of his fucking mind? He then began to list off the reasons why he shouldn't be Hokage, or even let close to it. After that, he berated everyone there for the argument, saying that the Sandaime wasn't dead yet and had plenty of years left. He also told us that we should also look at the next generation, not just our own. He said, for all we know, the next Hokage could be a student of mine. To this day, I am still convinced that Lord Jiraiya knew exactly who the Yondaime Hokage would be. The shinobi there shared a small chuckle at those words. In that sense, Jiraiya had been a bit of prophet, as his student did become the Hokage. I remember that day as well. Tsunade said with a smile on her face as well. What I can always remember the clearest was the look on Orochimaru's face when the sake was sprayed onto his face. It wasn't something she was going to forget. But what I can remember even more clearly was when we found that Jiraiya was going to be a father for the first time. Everyone in the village knew about his habits and how he kept sleeping around. So, when he first heard the news, we all thought he was going to ignore the situation for as long as he could and even try to avoid the girl. But Jiraiya surprised us by stepping up and accepting responsibility, even going as far as offering to marry her. All through the 9 months of her pregnancy, he was nervous and uncertain, not sure he would be a good father even when both I and Orochimaru, and even Sarutobi-sensei had assured him that he would be. But when his firstborn was a stillborn and the mother had died in childbirth, he broke down and wept. I always remember that day, because it reminded me that no matter what he would do or cause, Jiraiya was still a man who wanted a family and always cried when he was denied the chance. One by one, someone stepped up and told a story they knew about Jiraiya, how the man helped them or influenced their choices. No matter what kind of story it was, they told it, and they always had something positive to say about the Toad Sage. Finally, when the last person had finished their story, they all looked at Naruto. "Your turn, Kit," the Kyuubi quietly urged him. He stepped forward in silence and turned to face the crowd, just like the others had before him. The first time I met FS Sensei was when he had been peeking on the women's side of the hot springs. He began. I called him a pervert for it, and he objected, declaring that he was a super pervert instead. And that was just one of the many things I was proven wrong about him. He was silent for a moment before continuing. When it came to training someone, he was a sadist. But he also demanded perfection or something close to it. He acted like a buffoon, and yet, there were times when he seemed to look directly at the being of someone. And though what he wrote may not have been the most celebrated of books, he knew how to write a story. He was a friend, he was a comrade, he was a father figure, but above all, he was a shinobi. And he will be missed. He turned to face the headstone, so no one could see the tears that threatened to fall down his face. I will miss him. Taking the flower in his hands, he placed down on the grave. As he stepped back, others began to walk forward, placing the flowers on the grave. Once they had done so, they began to trickle away. From a distance, it looked like a crowd that slowly began to disappear into the street. When the cemetery had only Tsunade and Naruto left, they stared in silence at the grave. It was finally the Hokage who spoke. "We need to get going." He didn't say anything in response, he just followed her out of the cemetery. The few people who were still in the street bowed their heads to Tsunade. They knew that she would personally be mourning for the loss of Jiraiya. They didn't pay any attention to Naruto, and he didn't pay any attention to them. The two of them just kept on walking, entering the Hokage building. They made their way through the building until they entered her office, with the rest of the clan heads waiting for them. Tsunade walked around to the other side of her desk and faced the rest of the people in the room. As most of you are aware, Jiraiya left me his last will and testament. It has been revised as of last week, and was given to me with the instructions of being read after his funeral. Her voice thickened with the last word. But she cleared her voice and began to read the will aloud. "This is the last will and testament of Jiraiya, the Toad Sage of Konoha. In the event of my death, I bequeath the following items to the following people. To the Inuzuka clan, I give the deed to the forest areas to the south and southwest of the village, as I know you all have been using it for years for tracking exercises, even without my permission. To the Akimichi clan, I give you all the right to build on any building in the village I own. I only ask that one of them be rebuilt as a restaurant that has my name somewhere on the sign. To the Yamanaka clan, I give the right to access any greenhouses I have used and own in the village, as there are many rare plants and flowers in them that you will be able to use. To the Nara clan, I give my notebooks of different medical applications and techniques I have seen in my travels. With any luck, there are some that you haven't found and will record properly in your medicine books. To the village of Konoha, I give the sum of 2 billion ryo and half of my investments to be used wisely. To my teammate and friend Tsunade, I give my collection of rare and vintage sake, with the request that the first one to be opened is used to toast me. I also give you the other half of my investments, in the hope that you'll finally pay off your debts. To my student and godson Naruto, I give the original manuscripts of the entire Ika collection, along with first draft details of characters and rough sketches, as you are the only person I trust enough to not burn them. I ask that you publish the last book of the series if I have not done so before my death. I also give to you the remainder of my money, with the request that you first use it to help create the fifth country of the bending countries. It is my wish that these terms be given to the correct people, and that they will stop once in a while to remember me. Jiraiya the Toad Sage of Konoha. She lowered the will and looked at the clan heads. Are there any objections to what was stated in the will? She asked them. They all shook their heads in the negative. The Hyuga clan will help the civilian council with the proper use of Lord Jiraiya's given investments, Hayashi told her. The Toad Sage had made many investments over the years and most of them had kept him well funded. To be given half would be a great boon to the village, if they were used correctly. Thank you, she replied. If there are no further problems, I would like to speak with Naruto alone. The clan heads took that as the invitation to leave. Soon, the room only had the two blondes left. Are you going to do what he asked of you? She asked him after a moment of silence. Yes, he answered shortly. Will you do it from the village or? I know what you would want me to say, Tsunade, he said, cutting her off. It's not happening. As soon as the job we have here is done, we're gone. Ever since the Kyuubi had destroyed the voice inside his head, having torn it apart, the blonde had a sense of clarity he hadn't realized he lost. He now remembered and knew where his loyalties belonged, no ifs or buts about it. Quite frankly, he wondered how he could be so doubtful in the first place. I see, she said quietly. She now knew his stance and opinion were firm. While she was glad the Koto Amatsukami was broken, it saddens her to see him make his choice. His gaze, which had been hardened since the will was read, softened somewhat. I'll leave you alone, he told her, walking to the door and leaving the office. She did nothing for a couple of seconds before finally engaging the silent seal. Once she knew it was active, she broke down and cried like a baby. The next morning, Shizune would find her at the desk, sleeping but still crying. Location: Naruto. He was alone in the house. Azula and the others, along Aang and the rest of Team Avatar, had all gone to a nearby bar to raise a cup to Jiraiya. But he stood in front of the safe that was in the house. He had said that he would take a look at it when he and the clones had been cleaning the place, but a mixture of being busy all the time and some shape of an idea that he should keep away prevented him opening it. But with the death of Jiraiya, he was done. He could hear Toby's words echoing in his head as he stared at the safe. The next time we meet will be the one where you give us yourself voluntarily. He would go to them. That much was certain. And he would go voluntarily. But he wouldn't go to give himself up. No, he was going so he could finally end it. Jiraiya's death had been the last straw. It had given him the resolve to go through with the idea. And the minute that resolve came into being, the idea that he should leave the safe alone disappeared. It took you long enough, the voice of the skull said to him. Even though he knew it wasn't actually there, he could see it sitting on the top of the safe. He ignored it and knelt down so that he was face to face with the safe, placing his hands on both sides. This was a particular kind of safe, made only in the elemental countries. You could spin the combination lock all you wanted, but if the safe didn't acknowledge your chakra, it wouldn't open for you. But he had a feeling that it would recognize him. Without saying a word, he placed his hand on the lock and spun what he thought was the combination. The sound of the safe unlocking gave him his answer. Thank you, Mom and Dad, he said silently. He had guessed correctly that the combination was the date of his birth. Inside the safe was a single scroll. Attached to the scroll was a letter that said "Read me first." He took the letter out, opened it, and began to read. Naruto. If you are reading this, it means that we died before we could tell you of your heritage. It is important to know the history of what is in this safe. It has a bloody past and concerns both the Uzumaki clan and the Namikaze clan. As you have probably already learned in the academy, the Sage of the Six Paths had two sons, who fought each other for the rest of their lives because of what they believed in. But there's more to the story than that. When the sage fought the Jubi, he used a special kind of sword called a Zanpakuto, which had shattered during the battle. While he had learned how to possibly repair it when initially forging it, he never felt the need to do so. And he knew that if someone were to try and successfully repair it for ill intent, it would be disastrous for the world. So, when he was on his deathbed, he entrusted the remnants of his Zanpakuto to his eldest son, and the secret to forging and repairing it to his youngest son. As the years passed and the descendants of the two sons eventually became the Uchiha clan and the Senju clan, there was another rivalry happening. You probably aren't aware, Naruto, but the Uzumaki clan is distantly related to the Senju clan, and the Namikaze clan can claim the same with the Uchiha clan. The Namikaze clan had possession of the remnants, and the Uzumaki clan had possession of the secret. Throughout the years, the two clans have feuded with each other. For some, it was to protect what the clan held, and for others, it was to gain what the other clan had. But while the Uzumaki clan prospered through the years, the Namikaze clan was whittled down by other shinobi clans who had heard of a powerful they kept. Save for a few members of the main family, who fled with the remnants, they were finally wiped out during the First Shinobi World War. The survivors fled to Konoha and were given protection. And even then, they died out, leaving your father to be the only living Namikaze left. And while your mother may have been trained by her uncle Kenji, who was the current keeper of the secret, and was renowned as a swordsman, the secret was passed to her by the Shodame Hokage's wife, Mito Uzumaki, who had kept the secret before Kenji, and had passed it to him, when they had heard of Uzushiyogakure's destruction. Naruto, you are now the keeper of two secrets that have been kept from each for centuries. Therefore, we plead that you do not take what is in this safe unless you truly have no other choice. We plead this for the sake of your safety and sanity. Because if you try to attempt to remake the Zanpakuto of the Sage of the Six Paths and fail, you could very well lose your mind, if not your life. Please think carefully before you make your choice. And if you decided that there is no other way, then once you've taken remnants, go to the ruins of Uzushiogakure. Find the shrine in the clan head's house. Turn the sword you find there to our symbol. You will know where to go from there. Your instincts will guide you. We will always love you. Your father and mother. Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. The way the words were written were not consistent, they altered between two different styles. If he had to guess, they took turns writing the letter. It was a warning, he could tell. But he had no other choice. He put the letter to the side and looked at the scroll itself. It wasn't elaborate or had fancy drawings on its surface. It was just a plain, almost boring scroll. Are you going to admire it some more, or are you going to pick it up now? The skull asked him, sounding annoyed. He glanced upward and saw the thing was still perched on the top of the safe. Naruto didn't say anything in response. He just grabbed the scroll and closed the safe. He walked into the living room and placed the scroll in the small pack he had been packing since he had returned to the house. After double-checking that he had everything he needed, he placed the pack on his back and went for the door. He stopped and looked at the table next to the door. On it was the goggles he wore before he became a shinobi. Jiraiya had given them back to him 2 days after they had returned from the capital. He looked at it for a moment, remembering all the memoirs he associated it with. He looked away, only to suddenly realize that the top part of his vision was getting obscured by his hair. I should find something to hold it back, he mused to himself. Looking back to the goggles, he shrugged and grabbed them. With a practiced ease that he had forgotten he had, he placed the goggles around his forehead. Now finally ready, he went out the door and closed it behind him. The streets were empty, as it was now night and everyone was at home or at the drinking establishments celebrating Jiraiya's life. But he wasn't going to risk the chance of going down the main streets and be seen. He stuck to the back alleys and side lanes, where the shadows covered him and practically everything else. He moved quickly and quietly. Even though it took him longer to get to the gate, he still made good time. He walked straight ahead, not looking back. planning to be gone long, Naruto?" asked the voice of Kakashi, coming from the shadows that fell over the side of the gate. It looked like he had been waiting for the blonde. He almost snarled at the frustration of being found out, but kept it down. "How did you know?" he asked in return, keeping his expression neutral. "Would you be referring to the fact that you're sneaking out of the village, or that you plan to face Toby alone?" the masked shinobi asked almost mildly. "Both," he answered shortly. "Give me some credit, Naruto," he said with an eye smile that was barely visible in the darkness. "You may have left and you may have changed, but you are still my student. I know how you think, even if you try to deny otherwise." The blonde stifled an annoyed growl at those words. He didn't want to think that others knew how he thought. "Are you going to try and stop me?" If that was the case, he couldn't promise he would leave the masked shinobi alive, even though he wouldn't say that aloud. Kakashi shook his head. "No, I'm not," he answered. "You may not know, but you're like your mother when it comes to things like this. Once you've set your mind on something, it's all but impossible to change it. That's probably one of the main reasons she was able to marry Minato." He said the last bit with a chuckle, like it was an amusing memory. "If you're not going to stop me, why are you here?" The fire paragon wanted to waste no time, and he was being delayed by his former sensei. "I'm here because I want you to do something for me," the masked shinobi told him, becoming a little more serious. "And what is that?" He reached down into a pouch at his side and pulled something out. "When you find Toby, I want you to give this to him." He held the item for Naruto to take. The blonde did so, taking them in his hand and examining them in the moonlight. "They're goggles," he said after looking them over. They were indeed goggles, but they weren't like the ones currently on his head. These had one giant lens for both eyes that was tinted orange that were connected to something that looked like they were worn over the ears by straps. Even though it looked like they had been cared for, he could still see that they were old. "Yes, they are," Kakashi answered. "With any luck, he will understand what they mean." "So, you do know him?" the blonde said to him with both an accusatory tone and glare, looking up from the goggles in his hand. "Maybe, once," the masked shinobi answered cryptically, earning him a scowl instead of a glare. "Weren't you going?" he asked, deflecting the oncoming demands. He wasn't going to explain any further. "Yeah, I was," Naruto replied, stuffing the goggles into the pack. "Goodbye, Kakashi." He walked past the gate and out of the village. He watched as his former student suddenly took off, running at shinobi speed down the road. "Goodbye, Naruto," he said quietly into the night air as he walked away from the gate and back into the village. "And don't worry, if there's anything left of the person I once knew, if you show him those goggles, you'll find out who he is." Chapter 70, Forging Anew and Rallying. Location, Naruto. The boat sailed through the waves as the rower and his passenger made their way to the ruined island that was once the land of whirlpools. The island itself was in sight and was getting closer with every stroke of the oars. "We should be there with a few minutes, sir," the sailor told Naruto. "That's good to know," he replied with a nod of acknowledgement before looking back at the ship they had come from. After leaving Konoha, the blonde had traveled to the coast of the Land of Fire, following a map he packed. When he came to one of the coastal towns, he lucked out by finding that there was a merchant ship that was leaving soon. After talking to the captain, along with a bit of money, he was able to convince the man to make a quick stop and drop him off at the Land of Whirlpools. As the boat came up onto the beach, he jumped out of the boat and into the shallow water. "Here you are, sir." "The Land of Whirlpools," the sailor announced. "But I don't know what you'll want here. This place is haunted." He had heard a lot of that on the short trip here. The sailors kept muttering to themselves about the Land of Whirlpools were haunted ghosts. Whether it was true or not didn't concern him, he had to go there. "Tell your captain I said thank for getting me here," the blonde told him in reply, turning to face him. "Here, let me push you back out." Grabbing the boat, he pushed it back out to deeper water, soaking his clothes in the process. When he saw the oars had started to move, he stopped and let the sailor take it from there. He turned back to face the island and began to slog through the water back to the beach. "Now I just need to find where Yuzurishi Obakure is," he said to himself as he walked up the beach to the forest at the end of it. But before he actually went into the forest, he stopped due to the fact he heard something. "Is that a fire?" he asked aloud. The faint sounds of a fire crackling were floating through his ears, coming from deeper in the forest. "Sounds like it," the QB agreed, having also heard the noise. "Let me guess, you're going to see where it's coming from, aren't you? Is my hair yellow?" he sarcastically asked in return, heading into the forest and following the sound of the fire. As he walked, the sound got louder. Before long, he found the fire, and sitting in a meditative position, was an old man who had a bushy white beard, but also wore ragged clothing. Hello?" said the blonde as he got closer to the fire. The old man opened his eyes when he heard the voice and smiled when he saw it was in front of him. "Greetings, Naruto Uzumaki," he replied. "I am Guru Pathik." "How do you know who I am?" he asked right away. He had told no one where he was going or what he was going to do, with the exception of Kakashi, but he had figured it out so it didn't count. The old man laughed heartedly. "Do not worry, young one. I am not here to stop or delay your journey. In truth, I am here to help you. You still haven't answered my question. How do you know who I am?" he replied. "The whole world knows of you, young one, just by different names," the guru answered, the laughter fading away. But he did not change the way he spoke. "On one side, you are known as the paragon of the Fire Nation, bodyguard to the Fire Lord's sister. On the other, you are known as the Shinobi Kikken, once of Konoha and now, serving as a mercenary to it to help rid the elemental countries of the Akatsuki. All one has to do to know your name is to listen." The Fire Paragon considered the words he heard. In a way, they made sense. "All right," he said, accepting them. "That's how. Now why are you here?" This time, the cheeriness that was in the old man's eyes disappeared. With the grimness and seriousness on his face, he seemed to age a good amount within a few seconds. "You are probably aware that I tried to help Aang and Gaara achieve balance, only to fail with one and succeed with the other." The blonde nodded his agreement, letting him continue. "Soon after they had left, I had another vision. I saw you trying to forge a great and powerful weapon, only to see you fail, and lose your sanity in the process. I wish to prevent that from happening. You must have misinterpreted the vision. I'm not going to fail. In all my years, for every vision I've had, that has never happened," he said solemnly. "I won't fail," Naruto repeated. It almost sounded like he was trying to convince himself instead of Pathik. "If you refuse my help, you will fail in your task. You have yet to find balance with yourself. Should you attempt what you plan to do without finding that balance, you will fail." "No, I won't. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I won't fail." The words were almost becoming like a mantra with the way they kept being repeated in the conversation. He started to walk away, not wanting to continue this conversation. "Do you even know who Naruto Uzumaki is anymore?" That question made the blonde stop in his stride. "You are not the same person you were when you left the village of your birth, and you are not the same person you were before you joined the 100-Year War. You are not the same person you were when you helped the Avatar end the war and returned to your land of birth. Do you know who you are?" The guru repeated his question. Normally, he would have answered right away with a sarcastic comment while also giving an honest answer. But this time, he couldn't. Pathik was right, he didn't know who he was anymore. And that scared him. It scared him to realize that even though he had somehow been brainwashed, he had changed long before that. It scared him to realize that he really was different from the person who ran away from Konoha. He always knew that, but it didn't really hit home until just now. No, I don't. He finally admitted quietly. And because you do not know yourself, you are out of balance. But if you will let me to help you, I can help you find that balance. I will be able to help you find Naruto Uzumaki again. How would you do that? He asked in that same quiet voice. Pathik smiled, the seriousness disappearing and the cheeriness returned. I will tell you that when it comes time to do so. In the meantime, please sit and warm yourself by my fire. He waved his hand at said fire. I don't have time to waste. Naruto told him, holding back a snap in his voice. I have to get you Zushiogakure as soon as I can. You must have patience, Naruto. We will get there once we have taken the time to eat and drink. He eyed the blonde's state of clothes. Besides, I would have thought you would want the chance to warm yourself up and dry your clothes. He added with a small grin. Ooh, the old man knows sarcasm. The Kyuubi noted with an almost excited tone of voice. I may like him. The blonde ignored the fox. He was about to say something when a wind came through and effectively reminded him that he had just been standing almost waist deep in water and the temperature was getting colder. All right, fine. He conceded as he dropped the pack he was carrying onto the ground. With a few quick movements, he had stripped himself down to his undergarments. Within a few minutes, there was a line strung alongside the fire and his clothes were drying on it. Would you like to have something to drink? The old man offered him a bowl with liquid sloshing around inside of it. Thank you. He took the bowl and started to drink from it, only to pause when the flavor hit his taste buds. Not to be rude, but what exactly is this stuff? He asked as he lowered the bowl. It's onion and banana juice. Quite delicious, wouldn't you say? Pathik asked back as he picked up another bowl and drank heartily from it. Naruto just watched him drink the stuff, and then looked down at his own. Oh well, I've probably drunk worse. He said with a shrug of his shoulders. He raised the bowl in a drinking salute to the guru and drained it within a few short gulps. He suppressed a shudder as he felt the liquid go down his throat. This is probably going to be an acquired taste. He thought to himself. Location, Konoha. And you just let him walk past you? Azula roared as she tried to stab Kakashi repeatedly with her daggers. She wasn't having much luck, as her brother and Sokka were holding her back. He was going to leave anyway. The masked shinobi replied calmly, staying out of reach of the daggers. He had held his tongue the day after Naruto had left. At first, people hadn't really noticed that the blonde had disappeared. But eventually, starting with both Team Avatar and Team Paragon, they did. By the end of the day, people began to wonder where he was. By the end of the third, they began to actively look for him in the village. That was when Kakashi went to Tsunade, who had been about to organize a search party, and informed of what had happened. She took it rather well, as he wasn't sent flying out of the room via a punch. She just sent for the two teams from the bending countries and had Kakashi repeat his information, thus leading to the current situation. You still could have let us know where he was going. Sokka said, his voice strained with the effort of holding Azula back. Even with the help of Zuko, it was still getting difficult. All we know is that he is going after Toby, that's it. Tsunade reminded the tribesmen. The day after Sasuke had been brought back to the village, Kakashi had informed her and Jiraiya about the information he had received from Itachi. Once they had heard everything, Tsunade ordered him to stay silent about it, which he had no problems with. And considering all we have as a possible location, it's not much to go on. We have to do something. Katara objected from where she stood. And what would that something be, Katara? Toph asked from where she leaned against the wall with a snort. The only time you and I have been on this side of the planet was when they had baited, trapped, and killed that creepy snake guy. We don't know our way around. That didn't stop us during the war. Aang defended his girlfriend. We knew the basic lay of the land and where we were going during the war. She fired back. We don't have that here, Twinkletoes. We do. Suki pointed out, gesturing to Team Paragon. Suki, did you forget that we only have a possible location? June asked from where she stood against the door, her arms folded in front of her. It's better than nothing. She replied. Where else would he go? Okay, you have me there. The bounty hunter admitted after a few moments of silence. And he was smart enough to leave nothing behind that had his scent on it. You could always tell Nyla that he can finally kill Naruto. Kakashi suggested absently, keeping his focus on Azula. She appeared to be calming down, but he wouldn't call it safe just yet. For about a half-minute, she looked like she was actually considering the possibility. Finally, she shook her head. No, Nyla would probably actually try to kill him, and we kinda need him alive. She said, shaking her head in the process. Oh yes, we do need him alive. Azula said with a half-snarl, half-growl. Her face was one of unquestionable anger, one the original members of Team Avatar had seen on Zuko's face whenever he was really angry. I'm guessing you want Naruto alive for a different reason than the rest of us, right? Katara asked. What tipped you off, Katara? Sokka asked his sister, his sarcasm out in full force. Was it the fact that she's on the verge of going on a rampage, she's glaring daggers at Kakashi, or she really wants to find Naruto? Your sarcasm isn't needed right now, Sokka. She replied with a slight scowl. She may have missed her brother during the time he was away, but she had also forgotten about his sarcastic side. That part she didn't miss as much. Oh, I think it's needed. He replied as he refocused his efforts on Azula. However, she was beginning to calm down. The two of you can let go now. She told them, her voice still angry but also a lot calmer. Do you promise to behave and not kill Kakashi? Zuko asked his sister, keeping his grip on her. He knew well enough that if given the opportunity, she could and would break and kill the masked shinobi. The withering glare she threw would have made most people avert their eyes, in the fear that they would have melted. Fortunately, the two teams weren't most people. I am not a child, Zuko. She told him. I shouldn't be mad at Kakashi. I should be mad at Naruto for leaving behind like this. Her lips twisted into a growl at the thought of the blonde. I'm going to find that idiot, throw him into a private, and kick his ass until he's black and blue. And then, you will mount him and run him ragged. June said with a smirk, getting all the attention in the room. And judging by the surprised and somewhat mortified expressions on their faces, both Aang and Katara still didn't really know the other. Come on, are you telling me the two of you haven't done the bedroom tango? She asked, staring straight at the two of them. No. Katara replied instantaneously, cheeks blushing heavily. Aang, on the other hand, was confused. What's a bedroom tango? He asked. I've never heard of a dance that you could do in the bedroom. Suki decided to take pity on him and whispered the meaning into his ear. Once she was done, his entire face lit up as he stared at the bounty hunter. We should get going, he said hurriedly, moving for the door. If we want to find Naruto, we should start as soon as we can. He was out of the room before anyone could stop him. Okay, you really should dance soon, June told Katara with a deadpan voice. Both Sokka and Katara grimaced. Could you please not say stuff like that when I'm in the room, June? The water paragon asked her. They were talking about his little sister after all. Location, Naruto. After his clothes had dried, Naruto and Pathik began to make their way to their destination. The blonde had been surprised by the fact that Pathik was able to keep up with him. Just because I am old, does not mean I am frail or weak, the guru told him as they ran. They only stopped for when it was time to eat, and except for dinner, those moments were brief. Their journey had only lasted a day and a half due to this, and now, they stood at the edge of a forest. So, that is Uzushio Gakure. Naruto said, almost to himself as he looked at the ruined gate that lay beyond the edge of the forest. It wasn't the same as the gate leading into Konoha. It was more like a gate to a shrine, albeit a far more bigger and imposing one with walls attached to both sides of it. But whatever it looked like when the village was alive, both the gate and the walls were ruined. Yes, it was. Pathik said solemnly. It may not have been like Konoha when it was alive, but it had its own kind of life and charm. He looked over at the blonde. Are you prepared to enter? Of course, I am. The blonde answered shortly. He walked out from under the shade of the trees and headed for the gate. But with every step he took, a sense of dread and fear began to fill him. As the gate got closer, a mist began to form around it. While anyone else probably would have stopped there, he pressed on, walking through the gate and into the ruins beyond. As he walked, with Pathik a few steps behind him, he looked over the ruins of what was once his mother's home. The buildings that lined the street were smashed in, broken down, and collapsed in on themselves. Rubble littered the streets, making the pair have to watch their steps. Some of the buildings almost looked like they were still stable, but they also looked like a single touch would cause them to fall. And all the while, that sense of dread and fear stayed with Naruto. The mist followed, causing buildings to go in and out of sight, like they were there one moment and gone the next. He would have wondered what was going on with the mist, if it was some kind of jutsu, if they hadn't come to the edge of the street and looked upon a flowing river. Whoa! He breathed, looking upon it with wonder. It flowed into the ruins from the outside. It was wide enough for him to know that he couldn't leap to the other side, deep enough so that he would have to climb down and then back up to get across, and fast enough for him to know that he would be swept away before he could even get halfway. Ah, the young river, Pathik said as he joined Naruto. It flows in from the south. To the north is its opposite, the Ain River. And I suppose that they meet somehow in the center of the village? Naruto asked, half serious and half sarcastic. Something along those lines, he answered cryptically. Come, we must follow the river's current. He walked in the direction of the current and Naruto followed. The mist followed them, still trying to play with what they saw, and yet, it stayed clear of the river. And for someone, the blonde got the sense they weren't alone. He couldn't exactly say, but it felt like there was someone watching from the ruins. Within minutes, they reached the mouth of the river and saw that it emptied out into a lake that seemed to stretch far, as they could barely see the other side. They could see their side of the lake curved around it, like it was forming something. It curved inward gently, like one half of a circle. If Naruto had to guess, the other side was the same. But now, the mist was forming all around them, and this time, it was forming over the water of the lake. The sense of dread and fear that had been with him deepened. As the mist formed and thickened all around them, a voice rang out from all around them. Who would dare desecrate these ruins? It asked, the words echoing before finally fading away. On the path in front of them, a body began to form. When it was fully formed, it was transparent and the clothes it wore were ragged. But there was no mistaking the red hair the ghost had. Pathik did not say anything. He simply took a step back, giving Naruto slightly more room. One who has need of the secret you hide. The blonde answered the ghost. As he spoke, other shapes appeared out of the mist, ghosts who took the shape of dead Uzumaki clan members. Please let me pass so I can find it. Who are you to demand such a thing? The ghost in the front asked him. The rest of the ghosts, which grew larger as they spoke, began to encircle them. My name is Naruto. He began, deciding to go with the formal introduction approach. Son of Minato Namikaze. Namikaze! Roared several of the ghosts, in anger and outrage. They then began to list off what they thought of the Namikaze clan. Murderers. Thieves. Looters. Hoarders. On and on they screamed, shouted, yelled, howled and bellowed at Naruto, spewing curses and threats at him. But he didn't say anything in response, even though it was severely tempting to do so. The shouting stopped when the lead ghost drew the katana he wore at his side. You should never have come here, Namikaze. You've forfeited your life by telling us who you are, he said as he approached the blonde. I am asking you all to step aside, Naruto told him, looking at all of them. He restrained himself from saying anything else. If he did, it wouldn't have been good. But even what he had said incited the ghost. Don't push your luck, brat. He spat at the blonde. Only those of the Uzumaki clan may command us. With a battle cry, he charged forward with his katana raised high. When he came within striking distance, he swung down, intent on killing the Namikaze in front of him. But when Naruto's hands reached out and grabbed his own, forcing them apart, he was shocked. That's impossible, he objected as he struggled to free his hands. Our clan was destroyed. The blonde became angry at those words. Without thinking it through, he slammed his head into the ghost's and sent him to the ground. Some of us survived, he shouted at the fallen ghost. He turned his furious gaze upon the rest of the ghosts there. And don't assume I'm just from one clan either. My father may have been a Namikaze, but my mother was an Uzumaki. That got a reaction from the ghosts all around him. They all stared at him like they couldn't believe what had just come out of his mouth. What was your mother's name? The fallen ghost demanded as he stood back up. The look on his face said that if he was given a wrong answer, he would cleave Naruto into two. Kushina Uzumaki, he answered without hesitation and earning looks of recognition from the ghosts. Now, I'm going to ask you all again, stand aside and let us pass. The lead ghost stepped forward and examined Naruto's face carefully, like he was looking for something that was hidden. I can see her in you, he said, almost to himself. His gaze hardened. Why do you need what we have protected all these years? He demanded. I'm heading to what could be my death and I have no other choice. I wouldn't have come if I truly did not know another way. He reached around to the pack and began to search through it. When he found what he was looking for, he began to pull it out. Besides, I've already brought the other thing needed. He held out the scroll for all to see. If his mother's name had surprised all the ghosts, they were floored when they saw what he held. Is that truly? The ghost began to ask, only to trail off. Naruto nodded. This scroll holds the remnants of the Zanpakuto wielded by the sage of the Sixth Path, and was shattered in his fight against the Jubi. Now, I go to fight against a man who would seek to bring the Jubi back once more, he announced. The ghosts all turned toward the one who had spoken first, a single question on all their faces. He was silent for a long second. And then, he finally spoke. We stand aside for you, child of Namikaze and Uzumaki. You may pass. And like a wind blowing through, the ghosts and the mist faded away, revealing the ruins once again. Once he saw that they were gone, Naruto put the scroll away, and released the breath he had unconsciously been holding. Phew, that was. He tried to find the word that could define what had just happened, but nothing came to him. Indeed, it was. Pathik said, taking that step forward again. In life, I don't think there would have been anyone brave enough to headbutt the Ken no Ryushu. He froze when he heard that. You mean, that was Kenji Uzumaki? He asked. When the guru nodded, he couldn't help but chuckle. Somewhere, somehow, I just know that my mother is laughing. He started walking again and Pathik followed. This time, the sense of dread and fear were gone. That feeling of being watched was still there, but now it was more of curious nature. The ghosts that inhabited the ruins now knew him, they were just curious to see what he would do. With the mist cleared, they now had a much better view of the surrounding area. The ruins of buildings lined the other side of the street, opposite to the lake. Judging by the faded and wrecked signs that still to some of the buildings, it must have been a place for cafes and stores. For an instant, he could see people sitting at tables under the sky and the sun, admiring how the lake glittered like a blue jewel underneath the light of the sun. It was a picture that almost made him wish he could see the place when it was alive. But then the moment passed, the picture faded away, and he remembered that he had something to do. On and on, the two of them kept walking. Pathik took the lead, his feet remembering paths he had once walked. At the end of the street, he turned to head back into the village. Naruto followed, looking briefly behind them at the lake's edge. While the majority of the edge had a rail to prevent anyone from accidentally falling in, right behind them was a single spot where there was no rail. He was only curious for a moment before realizing that the guru wasn't stopping and hurried after him. When Pathik did finally stop, it was in front of a compound that had a large building that was still somewhat standing. "What's this place?" Naruto asked the old man, stopping beside him. "This is the house of the clan head," he answered. "What you seek is inside." "How do you know all these things anyway?" the blonde asked again. He smiled in reply. "I have been around for a long time, and I have been to many places. I also know many things. For instance, when Uzushiogakure was created, it wasn't built around a lake. Now come, the first to enter this hall should be an Uzumaki," he urged. "Okay." He took the first step into the compound, and then took another. Once he was actually past the gate of the compound, he started walking to the house. With Pathik behind him, they crossed the compound and went into the house. His heart filled momentarily with sadness when he saw how wrecked it was inside. He could tell that this was a beautiful house if it wasn't ruined. There was rubble strewn across the floor, pieces of stone, mortar, and wood. The walls had cracks running through them, some joining and then dividing, creating a web that was on all the walls. "Where do I find the shrine?" he asked as he heard Pathik step into the house behind him. "The last time I checked, it was to the back, adjacent to the clan head's bedroom," the guru answered. He followed the instructions, stepping over the rubble that littered the floor and being careful not to touch anything, lest it break and fall down, bringing a part of the house with them. And even though he tried to be delicate with the way he walked, his footsteps echoed all around him. It made the place feel larger than it actually was. They had to make a few turns to get to the back, as it wasn't a straight shot from front door to back. When he finally found the shrine, he was surprised by how well it was preserved. If he had seen the shrine first and only the shrine, he would have thought that the house was in prime condition. But then, he would have thought that the rest of the house would have been a bit plain. The shrine wasn't extravagant by any means. There were only two things that mattered in the shrine: an altar to the left of the entrance, where the clan head or anyone else must have prayed at, and statue whose base was where the altar was placed. Even though the mason who had carved the statue had done it so the hood had covered the face, and thus ridding himself of the need to carve the face, Naruto could tell who it was from the first glance. "The Sage of the Six Paths," he stated with reverence. He wasn't sure how he knew who it was, he just did. "Indeed, it is," Pathik agreed as he too looked at it. It was an ordinary statue. There was no color painted on it, thus leaving it all unblemished gray. The only kind of clothes the statue had been carved with was a robe to cover the body, and the hood that covered the head and face. Held in the statue's left hand was a shakujo, and held in the right was a katana, raised to strike. When Naruto saw the katana, his mind instantly went to that scroll in the pack. "So, what am I to do now?" he asked aloud. "That is something you will have to answer yourself," the old man answered. "I cannot give you all the answers, can I?" he asked jokingly. The blonde didn't answer that. His attention was fully on the statue. He walked to it and began to examining it. A quick look around confirmed the fact that the stone katana was the only sword in the room. "I'm supposed to turn the sword to the symbol," he mused to himself. "But how am I supposed to move a stone sword? More importantly, where is the symbol?" Another look around showed him that was no Uzumaki symbol in the shrine. The only other thing of significance was a small window opposite of the statue, an altar that showed the road they come from. Do you have any ideas, Fox? Ha! What? The QB intelligently replied, drowsiness filling his voice. The Fire Paragon couldn't believe it. How can you be sleeping at a time like this? He demanded. Hey, I felt like taking a nap. You've never had a problem with it before. The Biju defended himself, sounding both annoyed and hurt. Well, do you have ideas? He repeated his question. Nope, not a single one, the fox automatically answered. Good night. He went to sleep instantly, his snores filling the ears of his Jinchuriki. Had this had been any other day or any other mood, Naruto would have started yelling at the QB. But that wasn't what he needed right now. He had to remain focused on figuring this all out. Why couldn't my clansmen have made this easier? He asked himself. They could have at least given me a clue to where the symbol was. Annoyed, he went over to the window and looked out it. He could see all the way out to the lake. He froze when he realized that he could see all the way to the lake. His brain began to process the information he knew. The Yang River comes in from the south, and the Yin River comes in from the north. They both meet in the middle of the village in a lake. And when Yang and Yin come together, they form Yin Yang. He shook his head slightly. But it's not just that. There's something about that lake, I know it. The Uzumaki wouldn't have settled around just an ordinary lake, not when the name of the village is Uzushi-Ogakure. Does it have something to do with the rivers? And that's when it hit him. When its yin-yang was formed, it didn't just stay in one place. The two energies circled each other in a never-ending dance. If something like that was to happen with two rivers, something would have definitely happened. Pathik, did my clan build Uzushi-Ogakure around a whirlpool? He asked the guru. Yes, they did, but it wasn't known as Uzushi-Ogakure when they did. This village had stood for a long time, and the whirlpool they built the village around had only stopped churning when they had been attacked and destroyed. Pathik answered, bowing his head in what was probably for the dead. But why build here? What was so special about this particular whirlpool? He smiled mysteriously. It was a part of their duty to protect the secret. He answered. While the blonde frowned at the lack of an actual answer, he was glad to know that he was going somewhere with all of this. Okay, so that's the symbol. He looked out the window. And that's the sword. He looked back at the statue. Now how the hell am I supposed to get that thing to point out the window? He walked back over to the statue and looked over it again. But no matter how it looked at it, the statue looked the same. I guess it wouldn't be as simple as being able to move the sword arm. The blonde thought to himself as he idly reached out for the right arm. As his hand touched the stone, he felt it move, which made him freeze in place and take his hand off of the statue. It cannot be that simple. He thought in silence protest. Have you found something? Pathik asked from the side. He couldn't see what Naruto was doing exactly, but he could tell that something was up. I might have. The blonde hesitantly answered. He slowly reached for the statue's arm again and pressed gently down. The arm began to move down as well, the sound of stone grating against stone filling the room. It was slightly jarring, but he paid it no mind, choosing to focus on the arm. It moved slowly, and he had the feeling that he tried to make it move any faster, it would either break or stop. When it did stop, the arm was down and the point of the sword was pointing in the direction of the window. A loud clicking sound echoed off the walls, and the altar started sinking into the ground, making him step back in surprise. The floor followed the altar, lowering itself until it formed a stairway leading down into darkness. Ingenious, simple, and not obvious at first sight, the guru in the room mused with a smile. Uzumaki handiwork at its finest, he declared. Come. He made his way over to the first step, the altar, and started walking down them. Naruto followed and they descended into the darkness. The steps went back up after they had walked down them, leaving no easy way out. Guru Pathik, I have a question for you. The blonde asked him as they walked down a tunnel. Despite the initial darkness, they had soon discovered chakra lanterns had been installed along the walls, giving the tunnel a soft blue glow. What is it? He asked back. You said that you would help me find balance with myself, but you wouldn't say how. Will you tell me now? Indeed I shall. I plan to have you find your balance by unlocking your chakras. Naruto was confused by the statement. Last time I checked, my chakra wasn't under lock and key. The old man laughed at that. I do not mean that. What I call your chakras, you would call the 8 gates. They are the same, the former is the spiritual side and the latter is the physical. If you open them, you will be able to find balance. As he listened to those words, he vaguely remembered something he had heard from a fire sage. Aren't there only 7 chakras? He asked. The way you're talking, there's an extra one. There is. The guru admitted. I taught it to Gaara when he and Aang had come to me. Why did you only teach it to Gaara? I would have thought Aang would have learned it as well, you know, since he is the Avatar. It was because he is the Avatar that I didn't try to have him open it. The Avatar cannot open the 8th chakra because the Avatar is not just one person. He is 2 and 1 changes constantly. His tone made Naruto understand that he meant what he said. If you say so, the blonde said hesitantly. He didn't know what the supposed chakra was supposed to be anyway, so he couldn't object. I guess I'll learn about it soon. Actually, you will learn it sooner than you would think. Think. He stopped walking. We are here. Naruto looked around the guru's shoulder. In front of them was an opening in the tunnel. There was some light in the room beyond the opening, but not enough to see what was in there from where he stood. When Pathik went in and he followed, he was able to see to what lay inside. It was a circular space that was roomy enough to have a few people move through it. Above them were a few chakra lanterns, which gave the room the bare amount of light. On one side of the room was a forge that had no fire going, making it almost look like a mouth wanting something to eat. In the middle of the room was an anvil standing on a stone pedestal. Next to it was a barrel full of water. Off to the side was a workbench, which had a hammer and a set of tongs laying on it. As the blonde stepped into the room, he could all but hear the room humming slightly. What's that sound? He asked. That would be the lake moving all around us. Pathik casually mentioned. He looked over at the guru. We're under the lake. Now that he thought about it and remembered the distance they had walked through the tunnel, it made sense. He felt a little foolish for asking the question. We are in the direct center of the lake. The old man answered. Now once you are prepared, I will help you open your chakras. He stepped off to the side and waited there, giving Naruto more room there. Well, that may take a while. The blonde replied as he closely examined what was there. The forge doesn't have anything that could start a fire, or keep it going for that matter. And I'm surprised that those tongs and hammer haven't rusted away. I mean, look at the amount of rust on them. The 2 items looked like they had been painted a dust red because of all that rust. Oddly enough, the water in the barrel looked fine. Pathik only smiled. Do not be so sure. He said mysteriously. How do you know that the forge doesn't have everything it needs? I can tell just by looking at it. He protested, but the guru only kept smiling. Stifling a snarl of frustration, he went over to the forge and turned around. See? There's nothing here, he said again, gesturing into the forge. As he did, his hand lightly brushed against the stone side. At that moment, a complex seal array revealed itself. Naruto felt a slight drain of his chakra, making him step back, ready to engage whatever enemy appeared. Instead, he saw the forge was now burning a bright blue fire without any kind of charcoal or billows to help it, illuminating the room. When he looked over at the workbench, he saw that the hammer and tongs were now brightly polished, not a single speck of rust on them. Did you? He began to ask Pathik, leaving the question open. The guru just smiled again. Did I say I did? He asked back. Again, the blonde stifled a snarl of frustration. That's almost as annoying as when the fox is right or when Saifu shows up and decides to be mysterious. He thought to himself as he walked over to the workbench. I heard that. The QB muttered sleepily. His Jinchuriki ignored him, focusing instead on removing any clothes that might become unnecessary in the upcoming process. Once he had done so, and placed the pack underneath the workbench, he retrieved the scroll and placed on the workbench, unraveling it to reveal the seal it contained. He grouped his hands into a quick hand seal and muttered Kai. The seal glowed for a moment and then was engulfed in a cloud of smoke. When the smoke cleared, what the scroll had held lay on it. He looked upon 9 broken pieces of a katana. In the light of the forge, they looked dull and lifeless. He would later admit that was an odd way of describing them, but it worked at the time. Curious and intrigued, he reached out and took hold of the handle. The grip felt slightly uncomfortable, just enough to make him continually try to find a better, only to fail. He placed the metal part of the piece in his other hand, still trying to find that better grip. But as he did, he felt the metal slice his hand. Ah! He shouted, pulling his hand away from it. His blood flew through the air, droplets falling on each of the pieces. The wound healed quickly enough, but he was annoyed with himself for not realizing it was still sharp. Perhaps we can start now? Pathik asked mildly from where he stood. Naruto would have thrown a look at the guru, but decided against it, seeing as he had a point. Yeah, we'll start. I must warn you, Naruto. Opening the chakras will be nothing you have ever experienced in your life. He warned the blonde, his tone turning serious and his face aging with that seriousness. You cannot stop once we begin. I understand. Naruto replied with equal seriousness. Without waiting, he took hold of the handle piece and the tongs. Going what his instincts were whispering in his ear, he placed the piece in the grip of the tongs and held it in the fire of the forge. The blue fire eagerly embraced the metal, rapidly heating the broken end quicker than he had ever seen before. When the broken end was a bright yellow-orange, he knew it was the time to pull it out. He did so and placed the piece on the anvil. Taking a hold of the next piece with the tongs, they had been placed in the scroll so that each piece would have been a perfect fit to the previous one. He held it in the fire, taking it out when it was the same bright yellow-orange and placing next to the handle piece. When the 2 broken ends matched perfectly, he lowered the goggles onto his eyes. I am ready, he declared, reaching for the hammer. Then first, we shall open the earth chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of opening. It is located at the base of the spine. It deals in survival and is blocked by fear. What are you most afraid, Naruto? The guru asked him. The second he began to hammer on the broken pieces, the blonde felt like his body went on autopilot. He was not consciously in control. Every time the hammer struck the metal, a vision flashed before his eyes. Tinted red, he saw himself when he lost control and the QB's chakra took hold, destroying everything in his path. He saw Danzo standing over him, cane in hand and telling him how worthless he was. And he saw the Akatsuki, the ones he knew with their faces showing themselves, and the rest hidden in shadow. They kept repeating themselves, over and over again, and each time, his fear grew. "Stop it, stop showing me these things," he said aloud, his breathing becoming erratic. "They are not real, Naruto." Pathik's voice told him, somehow being able to speak over the sound of metal hitting metal. "They make you think of your own survival, but they are not real. If you wish to find balance, you must let these fears fade away." When he heard the guru's voice, he was able to calm himself. When the vision of him losing control appeared again, he stood firm. "It's never happening again," he said in silence. "You are dead. You will haunt me no more," he told the vision of Danzo. "Your days are numbered and I will end them," he promised the vision of the Akatsuki. One by one, the visions faded away and his fear of them vanished along with. A chime rang in his ears and the two pieces were now one. His body still on autopilot, he put the hammer down, took hold of the handle, and plunged it into the barrel of water. The glow of the yellow-orange where the two pieces had been put together shone for a moment in the water before darkening. Another vision came before his eyes. But this time, he saw the same bone-white skull that had been in his dreams. It had a spine attached to it. "Congratulations, Naruto, you have opened the first chakra," Pathik told him as he pulled a cloth out and dried the now longer piece. He took the tongs, put the next piece in its grip and held it in the fire. Once the end was the right color, he lined them up and began hammering again, absently noting that the humming coming from the outside sounded a little louder. "Next is the water chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of healing, and is located in the sacrum," the guru continued. "It deals with pleasure and is blocked by guilt." "What guilt do you carry with you?" The visions came again, but differently. They were tinted orange and showed each and every solider that had died under his command or alongside him. He also saw every single time he had gone to fallen comrades' house and tell their family the news they never wanted to hear them. He could see their fallen faces, their tears, the silent pleas for it not to be true, even though they knew that it was. "I failed them," he said to himself, the hammer ringing in his ears. "I failed all of those soldiers and their families. You must accept the fact that they have happened, but do not let them fill your mind. You must be able to forgive yourself." "But how can I do that?" he asked. "It's not that simple." "Maybe it is. You just have to try," the old man urged him. As the visions continued, he summoned up his courage and silently spoke two words. "I'm sorry." And just like that, the visions vanished and the chimes rang in his ears. He plunged the blade into the barrel and saw the skull now also had the bones of a torso. The humming got louder again, but he paid it no mind as he pulled the blade out and dried it. He just went for the next piece, held it in the fire until the end glowed, placed it against the ever-growing blade and started pounding them together. Third is the fire chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of life. The guru spoke again. It is located in the stomach. It deals with willpower and is blocked by shame. What are you ashamed of? This time, the visions were tinted yellow. Again, he saw the soldiers that he had lost. But this time, he saw them die again and again. He saw how Gao died, mere inches away from him. He saw how Old Lee died by being crushed by a boulder, and how Ing died with a piece of wood in her eye. He saw the ship sinking again. He saw how he sent soldiers into the battlefield, only to see them die, whether from a distance or close up, it didn't matter. He saw how he had been forced to kill his own soldiers when they were in such incredible pain that death would have been a mercy. He watched them die, and he knew that it was his fault. "I couldn't save them," he said aloud, his voice carrying past the sound of the hammer. "I wasn't enough." "You weren't enough of what?" "I wasn't enough of anything," he answered, his tone turning harsh. "I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't strong enough, and I wasn't fast enough to save them. I wasn't enough." Just as you forgave yourself for letting those soldiers, you must also do the same for not being what you say. Pathik told him. Let your shame flow away. I can't do that. He protested. It would feel like those soldiers meant nothing to him when that wasn't true. You must. It was my shame that made me keep trying to push past my own limits. If I let it go, it would have all been in vain. You know that isn't true, Naruto. It is not your shame that makes you constantly push past your own limit. Rather, it is your will and drive. The shame you carry has followed those two things and presented itself whenever you searched for a reason. You have to let go of that shame. As he listened to those words, the blonde realized that he was right. He always had that willpower to keep testing his limits. His shame had just his lie for doing it. When that realization struck, his shame melted away. The chimes rang again as the two pieces were made into one, and as he plunged the blade into the barrel, he saw the skull now had legs. When the glow from the blade faded away in the water, he pulled it out and dried it. He took the next piece, held it in the fire of the forge and placed it against the blade once it had reached the proper heat. All the while, the humming turned into rumbling. The fourth chakra is located in the heart. Pathik said as the hammering began anew. It is the air chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of pain. It deals with love and is blocked by grief. What has caused you grief? Grief, Naruto. A lot of things, he answered honestly. Visions that were tinted green appeared before his eyes. He saw the soldiers he had known alongside his parents, Haku and Jiraiya. They all stood around him, quiet smiles on their faces. I've lost a lot of people. But their love has not left you. It has changed and been reborn in the form of new love. You know this. The old man told him. And he did. All of the people who stood before him in the vision changed. Their bodies and faces morphed into familiar ones. Now, he looked upon Team Paragon and Team Avatar, Irika, Anko and her team, Konohamaru, and his teammates, and surprisingly, some of the Konoha 11. He let the pain of grief disappear from himself and heard the chimes ring in his ears. He saw the skull gain arms as he plunged the blade into the barrel. The rumbling got louder as he pulled the blade out and dried it. He absently noted that some pieces of the wall were beginning to fall off. But he was on autopilot, he was focused on heating the next piece, and then making it become one with the blade. The fifth is the sound chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of limit, and is located in the throat. Pathik spoke, his voice flowing over the hammering and the rumbling. It deals with truth and is blocked by lies, the kind of lies that we tell ourselves. Do you tell yourself such lies? As he hammered down, visions tinted sky blue showed him the moments when the teams from Konoha had chased after him, pleading with him to come back. I do. He finally admitted. When the people from my past, the past I tried to leave behind, tried to bring me back, I refused and told them to leave me alone. I wanted them to think that I didn't care about them anymore. And did you? All of a sudden, he could remember the dungeon underneath Ba Sing Se, when he had all but forced the Konoha teams to leave. Kiba's words echoed in his ear. Go ahead, Naruto. You just keep on running. But when you finally stop, we'll be there. We'll always be there to bring you back. No. On some level, I was happy that they cared. He wasn't sure what level that was, but he knew it there. He had just buried it underneath disbelief and lies. Now, it was facing him straight in the face, and he didn't look away. He accepted it, and when that happened, the chimes rang and the blade grew longer with another piece attached. When the blade into the barrel, he could see the skull now had hands and feet. The rumbling continued and even more rocks were falling from the walls. But still, he paid no attention to it as he dried the blade. The light chakra, known to the shinobi as the gate of view, is the sixth. The old man told him as he heated the next piece and began again. It is located in the forehead center. It deals with insight and is blocked by illusions. Such illusions hold you in their snare, Naruto. What do you mean? No illusions have their hold on me. He protested. He had the fox to help prevent that kind of problem. Are you so sure? The guru asked with a somewhat amused smile. Tell me, what separates a person from the Fire Nation and a person from the Water Tribes, or a person from the Earth Kingdom and an air nomad? Better yet, what separates someone from the bending countries and someone from the elemental countries? As he heard the question, the people themselves appeared to him in a vision that was tinted indigo. They all wore their own garb that made them who they were. You said it yourself. He answered. They all are from different places. And that is an illusion. It is the greatest one there is, the illusion of separation. We are all human and we are all one people, but we live as if we are different from one another. But nothing in this world is separate from anything. Everything is connected. He finished, somehow knowing what the old man was saying. And suddenly, it made sense. If you took away what they thought they were, all that was left was the fact that they were all human. No one was any really different from another. The chimes rang in his ears as he made the connection, and when he plunged the blade into the barrel, he saw that the skull now had muscles, tendons, and blood. The rumbling turned into shaking, and there were small leaks in the walls, dripping water into the room as he pulled the blade out and dried it. But he couldn't stop. He only had 2 pieces left. We are approaching the end. Pathik said, ignoring what was happening all around them as well. These last 2 will be the most difficult to open. Are you ready? Of course, I am. He answered, having heated the next piece and lined it up to the blade. The 7th is the thought chakra, known to the shinobi as the Gate of Wonder, and is located at the crown of the head. It deals with pure cosmic energy and is blocked by earthly attachment. You must find what attaches you to this world, and then let them go. That last sentence made the autopilot his body was on stop. The hand that held the hammer had been raised to deliver another strike, but was now held in place as the blonde looked at the guru. You want me to what? He demanded, violent tinted visions showing all that he held dear. You must let them go. Pathik repeated. I can't do that. He protested. If I let them go, it would be like I was abandoning them. Everyone I've known, everyone I've lost, and everyone I've loved. I can't make them go away like that. You must if you wish to find balance. You must let them go. He tried to find the words to express what he was feeling, but couldn't. But he also knew that if he refused and stopped there, he would fail. That was something he could not afford to happen, he had to do it. Closing his mouth, he brought the image of the people he cherished to his mind. And with every swing of the hammer, he let them go. They faded away, one by one, and each one made him want to stop. But he still kept going. When Azula, being the last one, disappeared, he felt that there was nothing attaching him to the planet. And he had never felt more alone. As the chimes rang in his ears, he plunged the blade into the barrel and saw that the skull was now a human being, now having skin, hair, and nails. And yet, it still looked lifeless, even when he dried the blade. The shaking that had shaken the room, as well as the leaking water and the falling rocks had stopped. But it didn't feel like it had ended. It felt more like the calm before the storm. Naruto didn't say anything as he placed the last piece, the tip, in the grip of the tongs and held it in the fire of the forge. Are you ready? Pathik asked him as he took the heated piece out, placed it against the blade and swung the hammer. Just start. He answered shortly, focused on what was in front of him. He felt like he was actively in control of his body again. Then I shall. The last in the chain is the mirror chakra, known to the shinobi as the Gate of Death. It is located in the eyes. It deals with acceptance and is blocked by denial. You must look deep inside yourself and accept who you are and you were. He wasn't sure how to do that when he was so focused on the blade. But when the two pieces surprisingly joined after a few seconds, all hell broke loose. All of a sudden, the walls of the room shattered apart, taking the forge and the lights with them. But they didn't strike him or the guru. Instead, they were swept away by the twisting water of the whirlpool that now had the room in its center. Somehow, the barrel of water had fallen over, spilling the water it held. All Naruto and Pathik could see now were the twisting walls of water surrounding, the sound engulfing their ears. While he had been surprised by what happened, Naruto quickly refocused. The blade was now complete, but it hadn't been cooled. The area where the two pieces had joined still glowed, and he couldn't use the barrel's contents, as they were now gone. How am I supposed to cool this? He asked himself, only to see the whirlpool all around him. Then, an idea struck him. It was potentially risky, but it could work. If this doesn't work, I will bend over and let Azula kick my ass. He silently promised as he approached the whirlpool on the opposite side from Pathik. Pathik. He drew the blade back and with a great shout, plunged it into the twisting water. As soon as the blade touched the water, it almost yanked him off his feet and tried to drag him into the water. But he planted his feet and held the blade against the current. It took every ounce of his strength to hold it there and not let it go. But it wasn't enough, he could feel his feet starting to slip. Growling in effort, he applied his chakra to his feet, keeping them steady and not letting him slip any further. As he held the blade in the current, forcing himself to ignore the uncomfortable grip he had on the handle, he found himself seeing the colored visions he had experienced before now. They all came at him in a blur, one thing from one vision mixing in with another, two colors mixing together. He didn't know what to do about them, they were confusing and disorienting. But he held onto the blade, never letting go of it. When the last vision passed, of Azula in green and purple, a light bounced off the anvil and struck the corner of his eye. The goggles he wore did nothing to stop the light trying to blind him, so he was forced to blink. When he opened them again, he found that he held no blade, and he was in a dark void. Where the hell am I? He asked aloud, looking around to see if there anything there. You are in yourself. A voice answered his question. He knew that voice, it belonged to the skull. But when he turned to where the voice had come from, what he saw was himself. What the hell? He breathed out as he looked upon his copy. They didn't look exactly the same. The copy wore orange pants, an orange and black jacket with the white swirl hanging from the left shoulder, a pair of black sandals, and a black bandana that proudly bore the metal plate with the symbol of Konoha on it. What is this? The original demanded. This? The copy asked, lifting a hand in self-gesture. While it may look like him, it was the skull's voice that came from the mouth. This was a possibility. It was what you could have been, if you stayed with the village. So, this is what I was. He said, mostly to himself as he stared. And what you could have been. The question is, what will you do? Will you try to forget what had happened? It challenged him. He was silent for a few minutes. I might have, if I hadn't had Pathik's help. He finally admitted. Now that his chakras were opened, even though some of them were painful to do so, he realized that had he tried to do this on his own, he would have now. He now knew that there wasn't any real difference between what he was then and what he was now. Even if he didn't call himself one, he thought and fought like a shinobi. The complete meaning of that state of mind hadn't really hit home until just then. I've been running from my past for some time now. Maybe it's time for me to stop and accept who I am. So what will you do? It asked again, this time with a tone of curiosity. Will you deny that I exist? No, I won't do that. I know that you were the Zanpakuto for the Sage of the Six Paths, and that you were shattered in his fight against the Jubi. Why would I deny you when you've been trying to get my attention? He asked the rhetorical question. He walked over to the copy and stopped in front of it. You are me, he said, holding out his hand in a fist bump. The copy smiled at the answer. I am you. It replied, bumping its fist against his. And we are who we are. The two of them said in unison. At that moment, a warm light filled the dark void, engulfing them both. This time, it wasn't chimes that filled their ears, but the deep ringing of a bell. And in that light, with the bell ringing in his ears, Naruto learned a name. When he opened his eyes, he saw that they were no longer in the middle of the whirlpool. Instead, they, for a lack of a better word, rest on the top of it, allowing the whole of the lake and surrounding village to be seen. Turning his head, he saw Pathik standing there. Did I do it? He asked quietly. Yes. You did. You have opened all the chakras and found balance with yourself. Pathik answered with a gentle smile. Relief flooded him, glad to know he had succeeded. Suddenly figuring out that he was holding something, he looked down and saw that the Zanpakuto was in his hand. He lifted it up to examine it. Before, the pieces of metal that was the blade had looked dull and lifeless. Now, the blade gleamed with an inner light. The grip, which had continuously uncomfortable before, now felt like it was the perfect fit. He noted, with a little bit of amusement, that the hilt was alternating bands of orange and black. I guess I need a sheath for this, he said aloud, taking the goggles off of his eyes. That was when something on the workbench had caught his eye. The scroll that had carried the remnants was gone, and in its place was a sheath of dark wood. He walked over and took it in his free hand, sheathing the Zanpakuto inside of it, and found it to be a perfect fit. He turned to Pathik and bowed. Thank you, Guru Pathik, for teaching me, he said, meaning every word. It was my pleasure to teach you, Paragon Naruto. Pathik replied, clasping his hands together and bowing in return. Now, I believe that it is time that you left to do what was needed to be done. He gestured, and when the blonde looked in the direction, he saw a pathway connecting the area where they stood to the village, right at where that gap in the railing was. What about you? He asked as he took the pack out from under the workbench and pulling out the clothes he had taken off. He put them on in a timely fashion. I will stay here a while and commune with the ghosts that still inhabit the village, the old man answered. All right, just don't do it out here. I'd hate to hear that you fell into the whirlpool, he said jokingly. The guru laughed as well. You are quite right. Well then, goodbye. He walked down the path and back onto the land, leaving Pathik in the middle of the lake and the whirlpool. Did I miss anything important? The Kyuubi asked with a yawn as he woke up. More than you will ever know, Fox, the blonde replied as he went the way he came. That feeling of being watched had disappeared. He guessed that his ghostly clansmen had approved of him. Soon, he walked out past the gate of the village and went into the forest, leaping for the trees. He flew through the air, using the tree branches to fly and put the ruins of Uzushiogakure behind him. This time, he was almost sad to leave, but he still had to. He was about 2 hours, at shinobi speeds, away from the ruins when he suddenly landed in a clearing. You might as well come out, he said aloud. I know that you're there. After a few seconds of silence, he saw all 6 of the Pains step into view, along with Conan. I had hoped it would be you guys, he told the 6 Pains, noticing the way they were subtly twitching as he reached for the hilt of his Zanpakuto. I've got a bone to pick with you. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.